39 Hunt. Well, forests are definitely not my favorite places anymore. At least this one looks different enough from the regular ones on Earth. He thinks as he tracks the spirit signature he had decided on. Hisashi eventually came across a trio of Gillian making their way through the forest. He wasn't sure if it was thanks to the system or just the fact that he maintained his consciousness during the evolution, but he was still able to use the skills from before despite being in the Gillian form. He was concealing himself with illusory aura while stalking the trio of Gillian. Illusory aura worked flawlessly, it just seemed to have a massive increase in spirit power consumption, likely due to his equally massive increase in size. Only his energy blade skill seemed to be wasted as he didn't have any blades in his new form. The three Gillian seemed oddly sedate when comparing them to the hollow he was used to dealing with on Earth. Maybe the increased spirit particle density or something else in Hueco Mundo was causing this, making them less hungry for souls while the regular hollow on Earth were effectively starving at all times. He closed in on the group without them being able to notice him as he stalked up behind the one nearest to him. Alright, no time like the present. Let's do this. He tried to psych himself up for his first battle with Gillian. He activated his blute artery to boost his attack to deliver a crushing surprise attack on his first target. He launched himself towards the first one with so much force the dry ground cracked. The crack was loud enough to gain its attention, but before it was able to respond he had already taken a massive bite out of its mask, taking it out of the battle immediately and started devouring it one massive bite at a time while the other two were still too stunned to react. Thankfully these Gillian were still too stupid to immediately realize there was an invisible foe attacking them. They might even be a decent bit slower than regular hollow in this aspect, probably a side effect of hundreds of hollow souls vying for control rather than having one soul in control. He should keep in mind that it might be different for Gillian with unique masks indicating there is a single soul in control. Plus 40,500 XP. XP, 53,230 78,080ths. Plus 1,012 spirit power. Spirit power, 237,478 minus 238,490. Mission, devour 20 Gillian 1/20th. While tearing into the Gillian the other two both started charging a Sero. He leapt back avoiding one of the Sero which landed where he had been devouring the first Gillian before, the other managed to take a chunk out of his side though. Thankfully it was just a flesh wound. They shouldn't be able to see him, but he started weaving between the trees just to be sure. They let out frustrated hollow roars. It seemed they were at least smart enough to realize that something had attacked them and they didn't get it. With his new and improved super speed regeneration it had kicked in and for only a little spirit power had already recovered the wound a handful of seconds later. Although he was successful he really missed his arm blades and the abilities he was able to use with them. If he still had them just using them in combination with Energy Blade would probably allow him to steamroll these three without even needing the slightest caution. He could use Sero, but them firing two was probably already enough to draw plenty attention without him needing to add more. He circled around the two that were trying to locate him before diving in again approaching the one that had hit him from behind grasping its mask and ripping it off forcefully to consume. It didn't even have the remote chance to transform into a pseudo-Rainkar as Hisashi was already devouring his mask and what was left of him. The last Gillian's limited mental capacity finally seemed to catch on that whatever was attacking it was far stronger and it tried to run. Plus 43,800 XP. XP, 78,080 78,080ths. Level up. Plus 1 free status point. XP, 18,950 79,250ths. Plus 1,095 spirit power. Spirit power, 238,490 minus 239,585. Mission, devour 20 Gillian 2/20ths. Unfortunately, it didn't take long to finish devouring the second Gillian and run after the last. Though he didn't get a boost in dexterity when transforming into a Gillian he assumed neither did the other Gillian, because he was still a decent bit faster than them. He concentrated blute artery on his arm and hand effectively turning it into a deadly spike. He leapt onto the running Gillian and pierced its skull from behind to finish the last one off to devour. Plus 47,200 XP. XP, 66,150 79,250ths. Plus 1,180 spirit power. Spirit power, 239,585 minus 240,765. Mission, devour 20 Gillian 3/20. Alright, they don't go down quite as easily as regular hollow. They have high resistance and their damage output is quite crazy. That Sarah barely grazed me, but it went straight through my defenses, but they might actually be a decent bit dumber than regular hollow. At least until one consciousness takes control of their body. I've seen more intelligent animals than these three were. He goes over how the fight went and the conclusions he could draw from it. They also give an insane amount of XP and spirit power though. I'm sure I'll hit a plateau again eventually, but for now this should give me at least a few more levels in days rather than months. He thinks with an excited predatory smile. System, put the free point into dexterity. He tells the system. Answer, affirmative. Host's dexterity has been upgraded by 1 to 61. Alright, time to grind some Gillian before Aizen comes back. If I can manage groups like these regularly I should be able to hit 20 before then easily, and if Adjuchas is as much of a jump as Gillian was I will be incomparable to where I was as a basic hollow by then. I already seem to outclass the Gillian I've found so far by a decent amount. Even if I didn't use my illusory aura and their lack of intellect to trick them I could probably take these three head on, but who would be that stupid? He thinks to himself. 40 tracks. The lack of a day and night cycle in the forest of Menos on top of his lack of sleep and the non-stop hunting and fighting was making it hard to keep track of time. Hisashi had been cycling through tracking new prey and devouring them or running if it turned out to be too many over and over. He could go to the surface to get an estimate based on how much the moon phase has changed, but climbing up and out of here in his current form without wings would be a massive pain and his time best spent hunting. He had just devoured a duo of Gillian and knew he must be getting close to completing the mission. System, how long has it been since I came to Hueco Mundo? He asked. Answer, 12 days 6 hours 23 minutes 54 seconds. Ah, never change system. Never change. He responds sarcastically. At times like these where he was completely cut off from social interaction he almost wishes he had one of those systems that had a real personality to interact with. Beggars can't be choosers though. Answer, affirmative. He shakes his head with a wry smile. Okay, well can you show me my status panel? He asks. Plus 720,000 XP from hollow. Plus 18,000 spirit power from hollow. Plus 52 spirit power from passive absorption. Plus 6 levels. Plus 6 stat points. Equals status panel equals. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 58. Race, hollow. Rank, Gillian. Level, 118-124. XP, 59,230 86,550. Equals stats equals. Strength, 84. Dexterity, 61-67. Constitution, 40. Intelligence, 30. Spirit power, 240,765-258,817. Available stat points, 0. Equals passive skills equals. Spiritual energy absorption. Super speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Equals active skills equals. Soul body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blute. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. Sero. Kumin. Negation. What's my progress on the mission? He asks. Mission, devour 20 Gillian 19/20. Okay, I still have about a week before Aizen should be bailing from Soul Society. System, is it possible to keep stacking experience and stats rather than giving me the evolution as a reward right away? He asks, hoping to maximize his return since he has some time to spare. Calculating. Answer, possible. Rewards are generated using energy siphoned from hosts' devoured spirit power. Unlike other rewards, the current reward was simply created by foregoing the siphoning of spirit power, in turn speeding up the evolution speed. System is capable of inverting this, increasing the siphoned spirit power and using it to generate an actual reward while slowing evolution progress. Would host like to make this change? Wouldn't this slow my leveling speed, making the whole thing a waste of time? He wonders. Answer, incorrect. Spirit power gains from soul conversion would reduce. Experience is not based on devoured souls though. Then yes, if I could get a reward and grind for a few more days before evolving, that would be even better. I'll leave the adjustments to you. He answered. Answer, affirmative. Mission cancelled. New mission, evolve to Adjuchas. Reward, passive skill, Silencioso. While he is discussing these with the system, he notices a few stronger signals approaching from far away. Stronger even than he currently is. He quickly dashed a few hundred feet in the opposite direction. Although he is used to illusory aura taking care of everything, he wants some extra insurance, so he immediately also performs Hachijio Sogai on his immediate surroundings, creating a second layer of concealment, making him even less likely to be noticed due to the very space he is in being concealed, and making others not want to pay attention to it. A few minutes later, a couple of HALLOW show up. Probably Adjuchas, because they don't look like Gillian and they're too powerful to be basic HALLOW. One looks like a gray snake, another like a brown and golden lion, and finally a unicorn. They start investigating what's left. Though all the Gillian have already been completely devoured, there are still traces of the battle. They are unknowingly completely ignoring the space that Hisashi is in due to Hachijio Sogai, as it forces their focus away. Where is it? We've been tracking for days and still seem to be no closer. The unicorn says in annoyance. Calm your hooves. They might not be here, but the tracks are fresher. The snake responds condescendingly. I can smell it a little, but the trail dies here. The lion says. Hisashi feels nervous and relieved. He didn't hesitate to deploy the barrier since his illusion doesn't cover his scent even if it is less distinct as a HALLOW. Some HALLOW do have enhanced senses that can still pick up on it. Meanwhile, the barrier affects all senses, making it seem like the things inside simply don't exist. See, we're still just running around. The unicorn says. Shut it. Your impatience isn't helping us investigate this any faster. The snake says, getting annoyed at the unicorn. Whatever. It responds to her and starts ignoring her in favor of looking around. The snake just shakes its head and starts ignoring the unicorn and looks at the lion instead. Okay, we were told to investigate and find out the sudden increase in disappearing Gillian. Obviously it's not a coincidence, as we've already found a few places of combat like this, so it's not a one-off. Any luck in tracking it from your side? She asks it. No, I can vaguely smell it here around the marks, but then it just vanishes into thin air. She says, her head lowers, seeming disappointed in herself. We'll figure this out. We are getting closer and closer after all. The snake says with determination, slightly lifting the lion's spirits. Looking at the power and destruction used, obviously it has to be at least a Gillian in strength, but they're generally too dumb for this. So it's probably a new Adjuchas or desperate Adjuchas hoping for some fast meals. She tries to reason. The lion nods in agreement, but the unicorn just seems to be strolling around. Saying she was investigating was a stretch. Finally they left, leaving a relieved Hisashi waiting in his barrier for them to leave the range of his spiritual senses. 41 Meanwhile back on Earth equals. Masaki was nervous and a little scared as she was walking up to her family home that she hadn't seen in years. Would they be able to forgive me? She wondered. She sighed and finally rang the doorbell. Yuzu opens the door and doesn't react right away. Her and Karin were only 5 when they lost their mom, so she is quite confused, feeling she is familiar. She can't quite place her right away though. Masaki falls to her knees and breaks into sobs as she hugs her daughter, who becomes completely stunned. Yuzu, she manages to get out between sobs. Seeing her had made all her emotions hit at once. Yuzu broke out of her stupor and hesitantly questioned Mom. Why yes. I'm back. She answers and Yuzu starts hugging her back tightly and sobbing too. Yuzu? What's taking so long? They hear as Karin comes to look for Yuzu, who went to answer the door. It didn't take her long to realize what was going on though, and to run up and join them in their emotional hug though. Just like Karin, not much later Isshin also showed up to see what was going on. But he just fell to his knees sobbing, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing as he watched his daughters and the wife he believed to be deceased. Impossible. He stammered. He was confused, because everything indicated she had died, including the fact that his powers had slowly returned over the 4 years following the events that Masaki and Ichigo went through. The only slight discrepancy was the lack of a body, but with the heavy storms making the river go wildly out of its bounds, this wasn't that surprising even if she hadn't been consumed by a HALLOW. They had searched for a long time, but once it became noticeable his powers were returning, Kisuke had told him this was likely the result of her passing on, releasing the seal on his powers and then returning to him. After a little while of them hugging and Isshin just been complete stunned and in tears, Masaki noticed him getting up hand in hand with her girls and going up to Isshin, the 3 of them hugging him too. Hi, honey. She says shyly. He is still kind of stunned and touches her cheeks as if to make sure she is really there before he hugs her back tightly, afraid to let go again. Where is Ichigo? She manages to ask eventually. Isshin looks at their two daughters, a little unsure what to say. He is on a trip with some friends. We should talk about it later. He eventually decided to say, avoiding the topic in front of the two young and innocent girls. The family spent their time catching up, though Masaki concealed most information regarding what happened and where she had been from her daughters, since she didn't want to reveal anything supernatural to them yet. Eventually it was time for the girls to go to bed, and Isshin had called Yoruera Kisuke to come talk. He showed up not too much later though. Oh hey. Welcome back. Where have you been? Kisuke asked in a frivolous tone when he first saw Masaki. Isshin shook his head, but was also interested in a more in-depth explanation now that their daughters were in bed. So how are you alive? Kisuke asks her. It's a long story, she said with a sigh. Isshin put his hand on her back, running it gently while nodding encouragingly at her. So that night Ichigo and me were attacked. I tried to protect him, but that led to me being attacked instead. However, after he ran, it turned out he didn't kill me and instead spit me out, she said. Kijik's eyebrow raised in curiosity, though he still managed to maintain his frivolous demeanor. Isshin still seemed concerned. Remember that boy that died 20 years ago when we fought that hollow? She asked. Isshin nods. Kisuke just stared at them curiously. He wasn't there after all, only having heard about the events afterwards and dealing with Masaki's problems due to it. The hollow that took me was sentient, unlike the others, and told me he was that boy. He had turned into a hollow, but was captured by Captain Sosuke Aizen for experiments, she said. Now she really had Kijik's full attention, since he was very interested in what Aizen had been up to during his exile. Isshin looked a little sad thinking about that night. Too much had gone wrong. So what happened? Kisuke asked, unable to conceal his excitement. Well, he managed to escape due to an illusion skill he has that they weren't aware of. Though that took 10 years. He had overheard some of their plans, including the attack on me, and interfered. He couldn't risk them knowing the attack failed though, which is why I couldn't come back until now, she said. Now? Why now? Kisuke asked curiously. Well, Aizen's plans are starting now. He should have faked his death already and be getting ready to betray Soul Society for good any moment now once he gets his hands on the Hogyoku, she said. Wait, how do you know about the Hogyoku? Kisuke asked in surprise. He overheard it during the experiments. Apparently Aizen is working with a few others in Soul Society. Ichimaru Jin and Kaname Tozen. He is already effectively the king of Hueco Mundo and is planning to use the Hogyoku to complete his experiments on merging Shinigami power into Hollow to form hybrids and build an army. She explains the plans. Kisuke slaps his fist on his palm while saying that explains a lot with the strange things happening lately. Strange things? Masaki asks. Yeah, like Ichigo becoming a substitute Shinigami, his friends getting powers, and his little friend that had my Hogyoku being taken to Soul Society. He says calmly. What? Shinigami? Where is he now? She asks adamantly. Isshin was sweating heavily. 42 ongoing. Isshin looked at Kisuke, trying to find some way to explain this. Kisuke just acted oblivious to his stares. Well, the girls were attacked by a hollow. While trying to save them, Ichigo got a Shinigami injured and she gave him her powers to save them. He started to explain what led up to the current situation. Masaki looked nervous since she still hadn't seen Ichigo, unlike everyone else. Then two Shinigami came to take the female Shinigami away and attacked Ichigo and his friend while destroying the source of Ichigo's Shinigami powers. He continued before glancing at Kisuke again. Then Kisuke helped him regain his powers and created a portal for Ichigo, his friends, and Yorichi to travel to Soul Society so they can save her and bring her back. He finished. Are you two crazy? She asked them. Well, I hid the Hogyoku in the Gigai that the Shinigami Kuchiki Rukia used, fusing it with her soul. Kisuke explained. So that is how Aizen is trying to get his hand on it? She asks him. Well, Yorichi is there to help them. He tries to justify. Masaki glare at her husband. And how is just she supposed to keep them safe? She asks. They're stronger than you think, and I had to be here to take care of our daughters, and he didn't know about our background. He said nervously. There is nothing I can do now, But if they don't come back safely, so help me, she says, threatening most of all to Isshin. Isshin tries to apologize and looks as pathetic as possible, unable to make any good excuses to calm down his wife, who is ready to rip off his head, and given the spiritual pressure she is giving off, she just might be able to do it. Meanwhile, you're sleeping on the couch until they do get back. She completed his sentence. Kisuke raised his eyebrows as he noticed Masaki's spiritual pressure. Didn't you lose your powers? He asked, both in curiosity and hoping to change the subject. I did lose them, but over the years spent near that hollow they reawakened. Well, that isn't all. Can you set up a barrier isolating this room from the outside? She asks Kisuke. Kisuke nods and sets up a barrier surrounding the room they are in, isolating it from the outside by all senses. Okay, we're clear, he says. She nods and starts to unleash her Nictig form, causing the hollowfied armor to spread all over her and her eyes to turn black with an orange iris while her incisors elongated. Finally, she also shows off her unheilig bogan that her heilig bogan transforms into during the transformation. Kisuke walks closer to her, inspecting her eyes and touching the armor with intrigue. How interesting. The armor is kind of like the material of the hollow mask, and the transformation is kind of like the visor, but there is no Shinigami power involved. He ponders to himself. Also, this explains why your powers returned, he says to Isshin, who has been trying to not be noticed as much as possible right now. He blurts out. It seems the hollow part of her power displaced the Shinigami part of yours that was sealed inside her slowly over the years, driving it out and returning it to you. Also, somehow in this process it managed to remain in equilibrium with her Quincy powers that had gone dormant somehow. He hypothesized. It wasn't quite at equilibrium right away. I almost died when the hollow side burst out and almost went on a rampage if I hadn't been stopped, she clarified. Although it's a lot like the visor, this shouldn't be possible because unlike Shinigami where it is hard, but possible, her Quincy spirit power should clash with the hollow part until she died. However, somehow with your Shinigami power having suppressed it and slowly allowing it to integrate over time instead of at once, it succeeded. She is probably the first person to succeed instead of die, probably the last too, he says. Both Masaki and Isshin don't look like they follow a lot of it and just kind of nod along with what he is saying as he speaks his mind mostly for his own benefit. Meanwhile, Masaki releases the transformation, turning her back to normal again. I'd love to get some measurements to see just how the two are blending while you maintain your transformed state, Kisuke says. Masaki frowns as that is just about the least of her priorities right now. Maybe we can do that some other time, she said reluctantly, more concerned about her son than satisfying Kijik's curiosity for now. Although she eventually would want more information about what she had become, she couldn't focus on that right now. Kisuke ended up leaving not much later, leaving the two alone, where Masaki just shot Isshin one last glare as she headed to the bedroom while he knew he didn't have much of a choice beyond trying to coax her over the next few days and hopefully make some progress at calming her down. Back in Hueco Mundo, Hisashi had just finished fighting another small group of Gillian. He kept avoiding large groups, because although he was far more powerful than a regular Gillian and was able to trick most of them quite easily, if he were to be surrounded by dozens of them all firing their Sero at him at once, it was still very likely he could end up dead. Also, with those three Adjuchas chasing him down, even if it didn't leave him dead, it very well could leave him injured and recovering while they find him. So instead he looked for small groups of stragglers on their own that he could pick off instead. Although this was much slower, it was so much safer, and though in a rush, he wasn't in a rush to die. Evolution requirements met. Evolution commencing. Oh shit, Hisashi thought as he suddenly got the warning at the last moment. 43 new form. He didn't even have time to use Hachijio Sogai to conceal himself before his spirit power started running rampant through every part of his body to facilitate his evolution to Adjuchas. Hisashi felt his form compressing and refining. Thankfully, compared to expanding like he had before, this wasn't near as excruciating as that had been, allowing him to keep some of his consciousness instead of completely blacking out, which allowed him to notice his line of sight lower drastically. Evolution completed. Rank, Gillian minus Adjuchas. Strength, 84 minus 126. Dexterity, 71 minus 213. Constitution, 40 minus 60. Intelligence, 30 minus 60. Spirit power, 268,841 minus 537,682. Mission completed. Passive skill, Silencioso gained. Silencioso. A passive ability that dampens all non-vocal sounds generated by the user by 95% at all times. Phew. At least I don't seem to be insanely big. He thought happily. A step towards a more human-like form, no matter how small the step was, will always be welcome to him. He wasn't sure exactly how tall he was compared to his base hollow form, since he had never been in that form in the Forest of Menos, so he couldn't quite compare his current self with the current reference points. He roughly estimated he was about the same size, maybe a little shorter than he was in his base hollow form, which was around 10 feet tall. He lifted his arms and saw they were back to human-like arms, transforming into iridescent blades at the forearm. He had kind of missed them when fighting as a Gillian, since although he didn't like having hands outside of combat, combat was all he had been doing since his evolution to Gillian, and swords were what he was most comfortable with. Although tearing Gillian apart with his hands had been fresh, he was looking forward to further refining his swordsmanship. He looked down at his feet to see he still only had 2 legs, unlike before he transformed into a Gillian, so thankfully he remained bipedal just like he had become as a Gillian, which was another more human-like feature he was happy about. This also meant he could finally put to work some of the footwork knowledge he had gleaned from spying on Byakuya that was impossible when he was 4-legged or a giant without a sword, and merging it into his footwork knowledge from when he was still human. Finally he noticed something strange from the corners of his eyes. What the fuck? Do I have 2 extra arms? Though as he turned his head to see an extra set of arms coming from around his shoulders, identical to the first set he had. It took him a little to get used to using them, as he had never had 4 arms, and even with some instinctual knowledge on how to move them, it was still a completely new experience to him. Well, 4 blade arms means being able to unleash even more slashes at the same time from more directions to confuse and damage opponents. So though not quite human-like, it'll be helpful at least for as long as I am in Hueco Mundo, so I'll take what I can get, he thought while releasing some slashes with his new arms. He couldn't even hear the sound of them cutting through the air, unsure if they were just that sharp or whether to thank his new passive skill Silencioso for this. He also felt like he was light as a feather compared to before. Being a Gillian felt kind of like what he imagined controlling a mecha would feel like, something he wasn't very happy with. He had some of his iridescent carapace again covering his shoulder, shins and back where he finally regained his wings. The color was the same as before, but the form was much slimmer and form-fitting. At least he was mostly humanoid now, outside of having 4 arms and wings. The carapace could just be excused as looking like he was wearing armor, even if it was actually part of his body. The carapace covering his wings shifted, letting out his wings, which he fluttered for a moment. Along with the arm blades, this was probably the thing he was happiest about. Though it was possible to stand on the sky, which was making to flying, it just wasn't the same. Flying with wings cost him in stamina rather than spirit power, which was a much less detrimental cost to him. It was also faster, more controlled, and filled him with a sense of freedom that nothing else could provide. The closest was swimming, but there wasn't the resistance that water provided. System, please show me my status panel. He told the system, already quite happy about the direction his form had moved towards during the evolution. Unlike before, he no longer had to deal with a massive abdomen and extra set of legs, reducing the space he took by quite a lot. Status panel equals. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 58. Race, Hollow. Rank, Adjuchas. Level, 128. XP, 13,810 91,710. Stats equals. Strength, 126. Dexterity, 213. Constitution, 60. Intelligence, 60. Spirit power, 537,682. Available stat points, 0. Passive skills equals. Spiritual energy absorption. Super speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Silencioso. Active skills equals. Soul body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blute. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. Sero. Kumin. Negation. I'll have to test out my new dexterity. It might take some getting used to that large of a jump at once, he thought to himself. He was very happy to be back to his dexterity-focused build though, since that was what he had been striving for all along, and the Gillian form had taken that away from him. It was a necessary evil for the sake of progress though. Without him even realizing it, between losing control and focus with the evolution and its results, he had been surrounded Three figures revealed themselves from behind trees in three different directions, not giving him the choice of retreat. The loss of control during the evolution process had meant not only his spirit power concealment had been unable to cover the pressure he was giving off during the transformation, he had also lost the visual concealment illusory aura provided him. 44 Interrogation. The three that surrounded him were the same three that seemed to be tracking him and had almost caught him a week ago. He could probably get away using a combination of his new and improved speed and stealth skills, but he couldn't recall what their powers were exactly while they were still Adjuchas, and they, right after the Nelliel trio Nell Dawn P, are the least aggressive hollow around, so he wasn't going to take the chances to strain the relationship unless absolutely necessary. Also pissing off one of the few Vasto Lorde. Ranked hollow in Hueco Mundo seems like a very bad idea right after becoming an Adjuchas himself. Even more so one that will probably be turned into an reincar, becoming one of the most powerful Espada quite soon thanks to Aizen. The three of them closed in on him while he was considering his options. Well, hello there. The Adjuchas, looking like a snake, said arrogantly, but paying closer attention he noticed they were all quite wary. Unlike her words, even the one speaking seemed ready to attack on a moment's notice. They had seen the remains of his previous battles and they had been convinced it was an Adjuchas just from the damage that was done in the battles and the amount of Gillian he was taking out, only to find him while he was evolving into an Adjuchas. This meant he was already at a level that could threaten them even before he evolved, and this made them very concerned for their safety now that he had actually become an Adjuchas. They were confident they could take him down with the three of them, but would all three survive if they tried? They weren't so sure about that at all. Should I put up my hands? No, with blades for arms that just looks like you're preparing to strike. Lowering them would actually be less threatening. He thought with a sigh as he made sure to actually not raise his arms to show he isn't a threat, and made sure to keep an eye on all three with both his eyes and spiritual senses at all times. Hey! Answer us! The unicorn deer one shouted impatiently, interrupting his thoughts. The lion one remained silent throughout, though just keeping her eyes glued to him. Hi. He answered, quite unsure. All three of them seemed a little dumbfounded by the dry response. Although Adjuchas started gaining sentience, they were generally still quite aggressive, even more so for newly evolved ones that hadn't adjusted to their newly gained sentience yet. Getting attacked was as likely as getting a response. Cat, got your tongues? He asked, smirking at the lion. The unicorn deer got quite annoyed, frowning intensely, and seemed like she was ready to pounce on him. The lion just growled, but managed to keep her cool for the most part. You. The unicorn deer managed to get out, muttering indignantly. Phew fufu. At least he knows how to talk, it seems. We have some questions to ask you. The snake laughed haughtily. He made sure to behave like he had no clue about them and had never seen them before, since as far as they knew they had never seen or met before, and even if he had, he shouldn't have been sentient at that time. Excusing Adjuchas for having above average sentience and calm is one thing. A Gillian is a whole other story, and although it doesn't matter much right now, if Harel finds out, and in turn once she joins Aizen he finds out, that will put a spotlight on him he wouldn't appreciate. So are we staying here waiting for others to show up? He asked them, though he wasn't too concerned considering his ability to use the chaos and simply disappear. The fewer that knew about all his abilities the better, though. You could practically see the tick mark on the unicorn deer's head with his nonchalant answers, showing he wasn't intimidated by them, or more importantly by her. You should know your place. We're Harel Sumas, and disrespecting us is disrespecting her. She yells in indignation. He might have been trying to lay low, but now that he was an Adjuchas and was interacting with sentient hollow and would be increasingly so going forward, he needed to change his tactics a little from how he had been acting. There is only one true rule in Hueco Mundo, and that is the strong make the rules and are respected. Now that he had some modicum of power, to speak of hiding all of it would do him more harm than good. The same went for seeming completely harmless. He stopped hiding his spirit pressure with spirit power concealment and released it fully, revealing his beyond Adjuchas rank spirit pressure laced with vicious killing intent as he turns to look at the snake that, though haughty, had been the reasonable one out of the three, and looked at her unamused. Does she speak for the three of you? He asked her with an unnerving calm despite the killing intent oozing from him. The three of them could feel the pressure on them almost causing them to buckle their knees, and the closest they had come to this feeling was how they felt when they were confronted by Berrigan Luzenbarn, the uncrowned king of Hueco Mundo, together with Harel. It wasn't quite that bad, but nothing like they experienced when fighting other Adjuchas. If they could sweat, their backs would have been soaked already. No. No, don't listen to her. She just likes to joke. The stupid horse. Just ignore her. The snake tried to calm things down as she was losing confidence even in taking him down with some sacrifices if the three of them fought him. You could never say for sure just from the spirit pressure alone, but there was enough to make it a serious concern for her. The lion was crouched and poised to pounce on him the moment things took a turn for the worse, but the pride in her eyes had taken a noticeable dent as she looked much more wary now than even before. How about we go to our place and just have a calm chat about this? We're all equals after all, and our leader would be happy to meet another sensible hollow. No need to do anything anyone would regret. The snake started babbling a bit out of nervousness, but slowly calming a bit as she continued to speak and noticed he hadn't actually attacked them yet. This type of behavior was quite common among top of Hueco Mundo, and just putting pressure on them by comparison to most could almost be considered kind. 45 acquaintances. The three of them escorted him out of the forest of Menos to a cave on the surface. He was led down a stairway into a room with a stone table in the middle. It was quite sparse and minimalist, but what were you going to expect from Hollow? At least until they are turned into a reincar. Even the Adjuchas and Vasto Lorde are just a little above sentient beasts. Interior design isn't really meant for them. Neither is comfort, it would seem, from the lack of anything to sit or sleep on. Harel was nowhere to be seen, and the other three were still too nervous to restart the conversation after it broke down in the forest. After a long awkward silence, Hisashi decided to try breaking the awkward atmosphere. So, I don't think you ladies ever introduced yourselves. He volunteered. They looked at each other. Though he had made them nervous in the forest, the walk back without unleashing his spirit pressure and killing intent had managed to calm them down quite a bit. I go by Cyan Sung Sun, the snake hollow eventually said first out of the three. Emalu Apaxi. The unicorn deer hollow rushed to say after Sung Sun broke the ice. And I'm Franska Mila Rose. The lion hollow ended up saying last. And together we are. The Trapisch's jazz hands JK. Ah. Nice names. He says, not sure how to keep the conversation going. Of course. Have you taken a name yet? Sung Sun ends up asking, hoping to get some information at least before Harel shows up. That way she can at least make it seems like she isn't completely useless as a subordinate. Should I tell them my actual name? It's not like it means anything to any hollow or even in Soul Society. At this point only two humans know my name. Although I can't be completely honest about my origins nor skills, a little bit would be good to start on the best foot with them. Hisashi mulls over in his mind. Saito Hisashi, you can just call me Hisashi though. He ended up saying, trying to lighten the mood some more. Oh, and it's nice to meet you three. He added. The three of them stared at each other awkwardly. Yes, nice to meet you too. Sung Sun ended up answering while the other two hesitantly nodded in agreement. Not much later, a tan green-eyed beauty with wild blonde hair and skin-tight bone armor and what looked like a shark tooth-styled blade for a right arm came walking down the stairs with her long bone white shark tail swinging behind her. Most of her face was covered by her hollow mask except the area around her sultry eyes. Did she intentionally show up late and make me wait, using social dynamics to exert pressure as the superior in this relationship from the start, or was this just a coincidence? He wondered. The trio all lower their heads towards her out of respect as she enters the chamber. It was a little awkward for Hollow to be showing their respect in such a way. Though Hollow would generally respect and listen to those more powerful than them, at least out of self-preservation if anything. It was quite rare for them to bow down even to those stronger than them though. Welcome back, Harel-sama. They say practically in unison. Thank you. She responded before looking at the stranger in their cave. Ah. This is the one we were tracking. We found him during his evolution to Adjuchas in the forest of Menos. Sung Sun says to clarify. Saito Hisashi, a pleasure to make your acquaintance. He says frivolously. Harel raises her eyebrow. For a brand new Adjuchas to be so well spoken, and not only that, but she couldn't sense any killing intent, which was near ubiquitous with all Hollow, was rather unusual. You're a rather strange Hollow. Harel said frankly. Ha. I get that a lot, just ask Miss Curvy over there. Hisashi joked and nodded towards Sung Sun playfully. She just grew more confused as she herself was just about the calmest Hollow she knew. Calm wasn't the right word though. Casual was more accurate. something that was even less common than calm among the hollow, as they were still heavily influenced by their most base desires and used to dealing with other hollow, most if not all of which wanted to eat them. How very human, she said curiously. Hisashi shrugged nonchalantly. So the three of them told they wanted to talk, he said to get back on topic. Harel looked at him curiously. No, I think I already have my answers. We thought there was an Adjuchas rampaging in the forest of Menos, and you weren't an Adjuchas, and you definitely don't seem to be rampaging. At least not anymore if you were before. She says, having made up her mind. No problem. Who would mind being invited to spend time with some charming ladies? He smiles. They are all quite confused, the trio most of all. The two muscle heads had no idea how to be part of this kind of conversation. Meanwhile, Sung Sun seemed surprisingly a bit embarrassed despite her usual haughty act. Harel was slightly more comfortable with it, as Vasto Lorde began to at least exhibit a more human-like emotional spectrum than Adjuchas. However, even she is thrown off a bit by the casual banter that they haven't really run into when dealing with other hollow, and it is throwing her off her usual cadence. Oh, and I noticed a big hammerhead shark-looking guy searching for you. He seemed to be out for blood, and based on my senses he was more powerful than you are. I would prepare for the worst, maybe even move in case someone has tipped him off to your hideout. He warns them. She was quite cautious, but mostly dubious when he mentioned they seemed stronger. She was only familiar with one hollow on her level. That sounds a bit familiar, Tyr said, looking up, trying to recall what it reminds her of. She looks at the other three. Didn't I cut a shark like Adjuchas when we confronted Berrigan back then? She asked them. Apaxi tilted her head in thought. Sung Sun nodded immediately though. You did, Harel-sama. She answered her diligently. He was weak though, she said, quite sure of herself. Just giving you a little warning. I don't think you can defeat him as you four are right now. Maybe if you team up perfectly, but even then I doubt it. He looked strange. He was missing his mask, if that means anything. He tried dropping some information for their benefit and to inspire trust in himself for future dealings with them. I think we learned what we needed to. You seem to be in control of yourself. How about you join our group? We can help keep each other safe, increasing your chances of survival, and we have hundreds of years of experience we could share. Harel said. She had formed the group for female hollow to protect themselves from the male ones, but he seemed quite unusual and she was interested in learning more. 46 See you. As much as I would love to spend more time with you four and look forward to doing so in the future, I do have my own goals to pursue, so I'm forced to decline. He says with slight disappointment. As great as protection is, they're practically pacifist in that they don't devour hollow to grow their strength, which is completely opposite to my path to power, which I just can't afford. I would be shooting myself in the foot if I spent a lot of time with them. Not to mention that Aizen could show up to recruit them anytime now, and I don't want to meet him yet. He thought, sighing inwardly. He would need to continue devouring hollow to maintain his insane growth speed, or he would just slow down in growth to at, or who knows, maybe even below regular hollow. This might be acceptable to Adjuchas or Vasto Lorde, who felt like they had reached their limits after centuries of growth. They were eventually forced to go along with Aizen due to him and the Hogyoku being their only possibility for further growth, but he wasn't even close to that. His power was still increasing at an insane pace, managing to go from a basic hollow to Adjuchas with 10 years of effort, and due to the system this growth without barriers should continue for the foreseeable future. He might have to think about future progress by the time he became an reincar, since he had no clue what came after, if anything, since it wasn't in canon. However, this was still 2 whole evolutions away. He could just think about that once he got there. This doesn't mean I wouldn't be up for meeting in the future and working together if our goals align, he said thoughtfully. Harel nodded and seemed to be happy, or at least satisfied with this for the most part. It was really hard to tell when the only thing you can see is the person's eyes, and they are a pretty cold and unemotional person to start with. Or I could come over for tea and gossip. Though you really should work on your interior design first, he joked exaggeratedly, looking around the sparse chamber for added effect. The 4 seemed to be growing numb to his off-kilter conversation style, as even the 2 hot heads seemed to no longer be getting annoyed at his attitude towards them, probably just assuming this was just some weird quirk in this hollow's personality. It wouldn't be the first time this happened, as Harel herself and her 3 subordinates to a lesser degree had a very unhollow-like personality. Well, see you later, ladies. Oh, and Harel, 1. Last piece of advice on me. Don't trust or put your faith in anyone except these three here, even if they seem to be granting your dreams. Not even me. He starts off dead serious, but ends up teasing with a wink as he leaves the underground chamber and looks back at her. If he could give her a direct warning of Aizen at this time he would, but they just didn't know each other well enough to where she could just take his word for it, so a vague warning was the best he could do for now. He could see about getting closer after she became an espada and opening her eyes after she opened her heart to him like she had the other three of her future Frakian. The moment he was about to exit the stairwell though, he disappeared along with any trace of his spirit power, just in case anyone was keeping an eye on them, as if he had never been there in the first place. Now his steps aren't even audible anymore. He finally got a chance to test out his new and improved dexterity with no one looking on his way back to the Forest of Menos. No one could even see or hear him, and he was moving at what he felt was Shunpo Sonido-like speeds even without the skills. He wasn't sure exactly how fast people using those skills were, it sure seemed like it differed from person to person, so probably relied on how skilled they were at executing the particular movement skill. However, he felt like he was flying on the ground with his current speed. At least he knew that he was easily breaking the sound barrier, unlike before his last evolution, which was exhilarating. He got back to the Forest of Menos in only a fraction of time that it cost the four of them to travel to the cave before, and he was sure even if somehow a hollow could see sense through his camouflage, somehow it would be hard for anything below a Vasto Lorde to keep up with him speed-wise. As for the Vasto Lorde, there were literally only 3 known hollow at that level currently, at least until Aizen started creating a reincar using the Hogyoku, which he knew should start happening very soon. "System, please tell me how long has it been since I came to Hueco Mundo?" he asked. Answer: 17 days 17 hours 42 minutes 35 seconds. Okay, based on what I can remember, Aizen should either currently be or just about to betray Soul Society. Then there is about a month where he is building his strength and experimenting with creating the reincar before they attack Karakura town, and around 3 months before Oram gets kidnapped and the rest of Ichigo's gang go after her. He went over the timeline as far as he remembered. It was probably going to become increasingly less accurate now that Masaki should have met back up with her family and he had interacted with Harel and her future Frakian, but it was better than nothing, and the larger differences only just happened, meaning the ripples shouldn't have traveled too far just yet. I went from Gillian to Adjuchas in less than 3 weeks and could have even made it in under 2 if I didn't delay it to level some more and max the stat multiplication of evolving. Hopefully I can manage a similar feat in transforming to a Vasto Lorde before shit starts to go down, he thought. If I could build some alliances in that time it would be even better, but the only possible ones I can think of are the Harel's group, the Nelliel group, and maybe Coyote Stark. The last option I could probably cross off. He is easy going for a hollow. However, despite his loneliness, he seems a hard person to build a relationship with if he is as shown. I should try to continue building rapport with Harel's group and see if I can meet Nelliel's group, though I haven't a clue where and when to meet her, at least before she meets Ichigo. He considered his options. 47 Massacre. New mission. Become Vasto Lorde. Reward: upgrade skill, super speed regeneration. Oh sweet, I already heal incredibly fast from the majority of wounds. I wonder how an upgrade would change it, he thought, looking at the new reward he was promised. He saw she was traveling through the Forest of Menos when he sensed a large group of Gillian. It took some tracking, but eventually he found a large grouping of around 60 Gillian. Before his evolution to Adjuchas, he would definitely have avoided such a large group of Gillian due to the risks involved. However, the combination of his new speed and other abilities should make him near invincible to these weak and dumb Gillian. Excited to try out his new power, he circled the pack while focused on his spiritual senses and went over the whole range multiple times to make sure there were no higher ranked hollow around that could interfere with him. Finally, he stopped scanning the area and pumped a ridiculous amount of spirit power into Hachijio Sogai to create a massive concealment barrier surrounding the entire area containing the pack of Gillian. He wanted to make sure the power released by the Gillian and destruction during the fight wouldn't be noticed before he got a chance to finish it and devour everything. Though it put a significant dent in his spirit power, just his physical abilities should be more than enough to deal with them now. Once he entered the barrier, he stopped using illusory aura and spirit power concealment to free up some of the constant drains on spirit power and instead pumped the extra available amount into Blute and Energy Blade to further boost his base stats and coat all 4 of his blade arms in energy to increase their cutting capacity. Alright, time to put it all to the test, he thought to himself. He was feeling rather fired up to see the results of his hard work. Some of the closer Gillian started noticing him after he stopped concealing his visibility, and they could feel the massive amounts of spirit pressure that was no longer being concealed and instead was reducing their abilities further through sheer pressure. Hisashi kicked off from the ground with a blast, disappearing from the spot as he flew towards one of the Gillian at supersonic speed. On his way he passed a Gillian that he bisected horizontally with a spinning slash while continuing on to his target Gillian that received a stab right through its mask with another blade. He kicked off from that Gillian's head with enough force to completely obliterate the already damaged mask and sending him backwards through the air towards the next target, having already killed two before any of them even had a chance to register what happened. In this way he had already bounced around between over 8 Gillian like some kind of pinball before they even reacted. He was about to hit the 9th one when some finally managed to react to him, and 7 Sero were fired on track to hit him in mid-air. He immediately switched his Blute Artery to Blute Vene, redirecting the spirit power he was spending on increasing his offense to defense, instead tanking the Sero that were about to hit him. Despite Blute Vene protecting him, the Sero still managed to take off a few layers of skin, but they grew back almost instantly with his improved super speed regeneration returning him to his optimal state. Just before he got to the 9th through the rain of Sero, he switched back to Blute Artery and slashed through it before kicking off and flipping onto the one next to it for another quick strike with 2 of his blades slashing it. Another group of Sero were fired his way, and he sent the remaining energy blade energy on his blades in a cross slash to counter them before recoating his blades with new energy. He launched himself at another 2 Gillian, managing to behead them as he passed by and landed on one of the tree trunks, turning around and jumping towards the next Gillian. A second after he launched himself from the tree trunk, multiple Sero landed where he had been moments ago, absolutely obliterating it. They were simply unable to keep up with his speed. He had already landed on another Gillian, the force of his landing destroying its mask and sending it hurtling into another with him still on top of it. He ran up the Gillian towards the new one, using 2 of his arms to bisect it and launching himself towards another target before it even landed from its fall. He landed on the ground with 4 Gillian surrounding him, charging their Sero to ambush him. However, he suddenly spun, generating a small storm of blade energy, sending energy blades from each of his arms slashing all 4 of them at the same time before they had a chance to unleash their attacks on him. It couldn't even be called a battle anymore as he tore through the pack of Gillian almost effortlessly as he dodged and blocked their attacks while dispatching them one after the other as if slaughtering livestock. He slowly whittled them down until there was only him left standing on top of a mountain of Gillian corpses. This is going to be a chore, he thought to himself as he started devouring the mountain of Gillian he had killed. It took a while to consume them all. Thankfully, the barrier he put up at the start managed to conceal everything, so he didn't need to run and could take his time devouring them all without wasting any of it. System, please condense the records from the last battle for me to review, he asked the system, not wanting to go through each individual notification he received in the heat of combat. Plus 2,716,570 XP from HALLOW. Plus 63,800 spirit power from HALLOW. Plus 25 levels. Plus 25 stat points. Damn. Okay. Show me my status panel, he told the system, surprised by just how much he got from massacring so many Gillian at once. Equals status panel equals. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 58. Race, HALLOW. Rank, Adjuchas. Level, 128-153. XP, 48,230 128,470. Equals stats equals. Strength, 126. Dexterity, 213. Constitution, 60. Intelligence, 60. Spirit power, 537,682-601,482. Available stat points, 0-25. Equals passive skills equals. Spiritual energy absorption. Super speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Silencioso. Equals active skills equals. Soul body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blute. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. Sero. Kumin. Negation. Okay. System, put 4 status points in strength, 7 in dexterity, and dump the rest into intelligence, he thought. Answer, affirmative. Strength, 126-130. Dexterity, 213-220. Intelligence, 60-74. Available stat points, 25-0. The changes in his strength and dexterity weren't as noticeable, however with the jump in intelligence he immediately noticed just how much clearer he was able to sense the surroundings with his spiritual senses. Not only was he able to sense further, but he was also able to process the information received with greater detail than before. 48 Pride. Meanwhile back with Harel and her subordinates. Harel looked at her 3 subordinates. So what happened before I got here? She asked them. Well, we were tracking him for the past few weeks, but we were completely unable to catch sight of him, only finding the remains of his battles after he was already gone every time. Sung Sun told her. Apaxi and Mila Rose nodded in agreement. Then we finally caught a lucky break as we felt a large and chaotic fluctuation of spirit pressure in the area we were tracking him in. We rushed there only to find he was actually in the middle of evolving from Gillian to Adjuchas rather than already being an Adjuchas. Sung Sun continued. Harel looked curious after she mentioned they couldn't sense him until he was evolving. How come you weren't able to find him before? Harel asked. I guess he has some way to conceal his spirit power and lost control of it during the evolution, because before that we weren't able to sense him and after we weren't able to either until he intentionally revealed it. Sung Sun explained. Are you certain it wasn't just subdued? Harel asked curiously. I couldn't sense it either. Mila Rose admitted while Apaxi nodded in agreement. So what happened after that? Harel wanted them to continue. He saw she had been unusual, increasing her curiosity. Well, since he seemed powerful enough that we believed we were tracking in Adjuchas when he was only a Gillian, we were extra cautious due to his evolution and surrounded him to make sure he couldn't escape. Then I tried engaging in conversation just to be sure despite him just coming out of his evolution. Sung Sun continued walking through the events. That's good. Harel nodded, happy that her subordinates were erring on the side of maintaining a positive relationship even if that was risky in such situations. Sung Sun gave a warm smile unlike her usual sarcastic and haughty ones, happy to be praised by her idol. He seemed confused at first, but quickly reverted to. Well, you saw how he was. He seemed pretty open to conversation, but his demeanor irritated Apaxi and the idiot provoked him. She said. Apaxi glared at her, but didn't dare interrupt. Then how did you all end up here? Harel asked her, very confused now. HALLOW were unstable enough without intentionally provoking them. It got scary for a bit. That's when he revealed his spirit pressure and killing intent, threatening us indirectly. Sung Sun answered, causing Harel to raise an eyebrow. Indirectly? She asked. He was definitely unusual. Threats were nothing special among HALLOW, but usually they were made overtly rather than not due to the direct and emotional nature of HALLOW. Yeah, he just asked if we felt the same as Apaxi while pressuring us. I managed to calm things down after that and convince him to come here. Sung Sun explained. Good job. Harel praised Sung Sun. Apaxi kept glaring at Sung Sun, but also looked a bit embarrassed as she didn't like looking bad in front of Harel. So what are your thoughts on him? Harel asked the 3 of them. Annoying, I want to beat him up. Apaxi answered without even the slightest hesitation. She had not forgiven him for what she considered his unforgivable rudeness towards them and most of all Harel. He seemed nice enough. He was interesting, at least fufufu. Sung Sun said with a chuckle, using her tail to cover her mouth. She was quite intrigued by the unusual HALLOW and eager to find out more. I don't know. It was fine. He was quite easygoing. Mila Rose said with probably the least emotion regarding the strange HALLOW. I want to find out more about him. I might have been able to if Apaxi wasn't such an idiot. Sung Sun said. Who are you calling an idiot? Apaxi said, enraged and losing control. Sung Sun just rolled her eyes sarcastically before turning away to look back at Harel. He was definitely unusual. We should keep an eye on him if we can. It might be hard though if he is indeed good at concealing himself. Harel said thoughtfully. The 3 others simply nodded in agreement. He might make a good ally though. He seemed much calmer than most HALLOW, so it might be a rare chance to find an HALLOW that is willing to help us. She said. It was hard to find allies interested in protecting others in Hueco Mundo, as almost all HALLOW instinctively wanted to oppress and even devour others. The only way to control those was through sheer force, and even then they would look for ways to stab you in the back at the first opportunity. Apache seemed annoyed at just the notion of being allies with him, but she kept quiet as she would never argue with Harel. What about that warning about the shark hollow? Asked Sung Sun with curiosity. If it's true we now know about it and can just be prepared for it. We will do some training and keep a lookout for him so we can't be ambushed. That way we will be able to take care of it. Harel responded. Though the warning made her a little cautious, she knew she was one of the most powerful hollow in Hiko Mundo. Unless Berrigan himself showed up, she really didn't need to be concerned. Of course. He won't stand a chance. Apache said in excitement, ready to have someone to release some of her frustrations on. We will stop him for you. Mila Rose said with pride. Meanwhile, Sung Sun looked a little uncomfortable. She wanted to have absolute faith in Harel like the other two. Unfortunately, despite her usual haughtiness by nature, she was far more scheming than the two muscle heads, and the lack of information regarding the situation made her uncomfortable as she was unable to plan for it. She wasn't even sure if Hisashi was telling the truth or not, and all the uncertainty just made it all worse for her. In the end, the only thing she could do is believe in the others and hope for the best. 49 measurements. Back on Earth, August 13th. Ichigo and his friends stepped back onto Earth in Kijik's basement. Their moods were still mixed. They had managed to save Rukia, however Aizen's betrayal was a shock to everyone. Even though none of them knew him before, they all realized this wasn't good news for them. Kisuke welcomed them in his usual happy-go-lucky way before all of them left to finally get some good rest. Ichigo walked into his home. He heard some sounds from the kitchen. Yuzu must be preparing something. He thought to himself and decided he would say hi before crashing on his bed like he had originally planned. When he made it to the kitchen, he saw what could only be a hallucination of his mother. He rubbed his eye trying to clear it up, but on a second look it hadn't changed. Despite deciding to always be strong for his friends and family after losing his mom, he broke down in tears. What? Masaki said, turning around surprised to see Ichigo in the doorway bawling his eyes out just like he used to. Despite him growing to be much taller than her, she quickly went up to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly as she rubbed the back of his head. There, she said, trying to soothe him as best she could. Rather than calm down though, his tears just kept coming and she didn't stop soothing him for as long as he needed it, to the point where some of the things on the stove burnt, but she couldn't be bothered to care. It took a long time before Ichigo could even get a coherent sentence out, trying to find out what was going on. She explained how they had been attacked by one hollow, but saved by another. Ichigo refused to believe it at first, as he had been there that day, but it was the truth that his mom was in front of him, alive and well. That was something he couldn't deny. She explained she got back a few weeks ago, and when she asked where he was, he got very awkward, making an excuse about how he went on a road trip with his friends to visit another friend they hadn't seen in a while. Masaki sighed inwardly as she obviously knew exactly what had happened and where he had gone, but she didn't call him out on it, deciding to just enjoy their reunion instead. Though she really wanted to punish him for lying too. A couple of days later, Masaki found herself in a large underground chamber that looked like some kind of rocky wasteland. Strangely enough, it looked like there was sunlight despite them being deep underground and the chamber being massive. Welcome to my basement, Kisuke said with excitement. Alright, I don't have all day. My kids will be back from school in a while and I still need to prepare for dinner, she says impatiently. If it wasn't for his incessant requests, she wouldn't even be here in the first place. It had been a few weeks since she returned to her family and had been catching up with them. Even with the regular reports from Hisashi, there was still a lot that was missed out on. Isshin was no longer in the doghouse since Ichigo and his friends had returned, though they all acted like they didn't know where he had been. The only one Ichigo was aware about knowing was Kisuke. Though she missed her new friends Reina and Hisashi, she was happy to have been able to catch up with her family, and she regularly talked with Reina on the phone, sharing what they had been up to. Kisuke nodded. He had configured a barrier around the store and all the employees were present in case they were needed for anything. Okay, what do you need? Masaki asked impatiently. Let's start by unleashing that hollow form, Kisuke said. He wasn't able to conceal the excitement in his eyes at being able to witness something that had never existed before. Masaki shifted into her Nick-Take form, the hollow armor with blue-like patterns covering her entire body, her eyes turning black with an orange iris and her incisors elongating. She remained in complete control as usual though. By now she had had a lot of practice maintaining the form and keeping full control of herself while using it. Interesting. How unusual. Kisuke was mumbling to himself as he was measuring the changes she went through during and after the transformation. He noted how during the transformation the hollow spirit power surged past the Quincy spirit power only for the Quincy power to surge to match it until they found a balance boosting her power far beyond her untransformed self. He was also no longer able to find any of Ishin's Shinigami power. It looked like all of it had indeed been forced out and returned to him already. He ended up having her use all her different abilities. Both those she had as a Quincy, but also those unlocked in her Nictig form, making sure to take measurements of everything that happened during them for him to go over later and improve his knowledge regarding hollowfication. The data regarding such a virtually impossible hollow hybrid was a veritable treasure trove to a scientist like him and might lead to him being able to help others like the Vizort. He was still very curious about the hollow she had met and that had affected her in such an unusual way, but he knew he had been gone for over a month now and no one knew where he was. Not even Masaki or Reina knew. During all of this Reina had been training like crazy. She knew he saw she was worried about her and that he wasn't sharing all his worries with her, which she blamed on her own weakness. She wanted to be strong enough to where he could share everything with her and she could share some of his burden for him. He had done so much for her and she felt she could never do enough to make up for it. 50 Back to Hueco Mundo. System, how long have I been at this? He asked. Answer, 3 months 7 days 2 hours 54 minutes 34 seconds. Can you give me a summary of my progress during that time? He continued. Plus 4,929,320 XP from Hollow. Plus 191,400 spirit power from Hollow. Plus 34 levels. Plus 34 stat points. Okay. System, show me my status. He requested. Equals status panel equals. Name, Saito. Hisashi. Soul age, 58. Race, Hollow. Rank, Adjuchas. Level, 153-187. XP, 105,992 175,780. Equals stats equals. Strength, 130. Dexterity, 220. Constitution, 60. Intelligence, 74. Spirit power, 601,482-792,882. Available stat points, 0-34. Equals passive skills equals. Spiritual energy absorption. Super speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Silencioso. Equals active skills equals. Soul body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blute. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. Sero. Kumin. Negation. Round intelligence to 100 and put the rest of the stat points towards dexterity. He ordered. Dexterity, 220-228. Intelligence, 74-100. Available stat points, 34-0. He felt the points making changes to him. The dexterity wasn't as noticeable with how small of a change it was in percentage, however his thoughts cleared up some and he could feel his control over his spirit power growing more precise as the changes to his intelligence stat were made. Hisashi had been hunting throughout the forest for the past couple of weeks, picking off a lot of Gillian and even a few stray Adjuchas. His new more humanoid form gave him a significant boost beyond just his stats growth, but also because now he was able to finally integrate bipedal footwork into his swordsmanship, unlike before. Unfortunately, though Gillian were quite common in the forest of Menos, they made up the vast majority of inhabitants, while Adjuchas were just not that common, and as he had been avoiding Las Noches and Barragan's territory like the plague, he had thankfully managed to avoid any Vasto Lorde and Arrancar so far, though as soon as Aizen made it here with the true Hagyoku, the amount of Arrancar should increase quite a bit. Devouring Adjuchas vastly outclassed consuming Gillian at this point, where despite him devouring hundreds of times the amount of Adjuchas he has managed to, the Adjuchas still provided more progress towards his evolution than all the Gillian combined did. He wouldn't complain about any little gain though, as he was on a timer. During this time he had been able to avoid any troublesome people during his hunts, though he did sense the Harel trio on the periphery of his senses a few times, meaning they were probably keeping an eye on him on Harel's orders. He didn't mind that, as long as they didn't get in his way though. I wonder how everyone is doing. Hopefully my interference has been limited enough that Ichigo and the gang made it through the whole Soul Society arc alive, or else Masaki is going to raise hell for us all. He thought to himself. He felt he had done his best to give them a better outcome though, and the rest was ultimately up to them. While in thought and traveling through the forest in search of his next prey, he noticed a commotion in the distance and decided to stealthily take a closer look at what was causing it. If it was some strong Adjuchas clashing, it could be a 2-for-1 special by ambushing them while distracted by each other and exhausted. There he found the Harel trio, the Trebuchets, in a standoff with a large white panther-looking Adjuchas staring down at them proudly and 5 more backing him up. They resembled a knight, a bruiser, a bull, one that still looked like a Gillian, and a hammerhead shark. Grimmjow Jajurgic and his followers. One of the last things I wanted to run into at this time in Waco Mundo. Not only is he annoying to deal with himself, he should also be joining Aizen anytime soon now if he isn't already in contact with him. Worse, unlike Harel's little group, this is never going to end peacefully with this hothead around. Hisashi thought to himself, hoping to make a quick exit if he could. They must have run into his little clique while trying to follow him, and once Grimmjow came across them it would be hard to get him to let go of his targets. The trio was more powerful than Grimmjow's teammates individually, but they were outnumbered and Grimmjow is significantly stronger than the rest of his group. I would usually just ignore Grimmjow and avoid him using my stealth skills, but chances are this encounter was never meant to happen, it being a result only from my presence, meaning the trio could very well die or be forced to submit, changing things significantly. Then again, so could interfering with their fight and revealing myself to Grimmjow shortly before he joins Aizen. He pondered, unsure as to what to do with this situation. Finally he sighed to himself, in the end I'm kind of a softie. Though ruthless to enemies, I want to repay kindness in kind. They were pretty nice to me for HALLOW, and I don't really want harm to come to the only ones to treat me like that during my entire stay in Huko Mundo. They are probably also my only potential allies here aside from possibly Nelliel's group, except they are completely unreliable. Grimmjow's group was slowly nearing the trio and surrounding them, with Grimmjow in the middle still holding them in place with the pressure of his stare. I guess you barely qualify. He spoke, arrogance dripping from every word. I'll give you all a chance. Kneel before this king and serve me, then I'll spare your lives, otherwise you can be the next step towards greatness for this king. The trio were looking at each other hesitantly as they were extremely loyal to Harel, but the odds of them escaping unscathed and possibly even alive wasn't that great. Grimmjow bared his fangs at them threateningly due to this delay in response and lack of servility. If they wouldn't kneel to their betters, he would simply trample upon them. How about I help you shove that big head of yours up your ass instead? Apache finally couldn't stand it anymore and recklessly insulted him in return. Then I will just take it. He sneers and pounces towards Apache. New mission: protect the Trebuchets. Reward: new skill, skill infusion. 51 bad knees. He didn't even have to consider it at all and was already dashing to intercept Grimmjow, blocking his palm moments by crossing 2 of his blades before it could reach Apache, his camouflage illusion slowly unraveling as it ended up with the 2 of them bound in a stalemate, trying to force one another back until finally Hisashi swung his extra 2 blades towards him, forcing Grimmjow to give up on the competition of strength and back away from them. TCH. Annoying bug. Grimmjow spat out aggressively, annoyed that he had suddenly been interrupted by someone else. His eyes screamed murder for his rightful prey being taken away. My apologies, I'll also have to avoid kneeling, I have bad knees. How about a rain check? Hisashi responded lightly as he kept an eye on all of the Adjuchas and his surroundings to position himself better. There was no need to be polite with Grimmjow, unlike Harel. The only options he would ever offer them is submit or die. Giving up isn't in his dictionary. What are you doing here? He heard Apache yell from behind him with a mix of anger, indignation and embarrassment at being caught off guard and saved. What? Are you not in need of saving, princess? He couldn't stop himself from teasing her while she was embarrassed. Shut up. I can easily stomp this cat to death without you. She continued to yell back to cover for her embarrassment. The other 2 also seemed to relax a little. Although they were still outnumbered, they were fairly certain he was stronger than all 3 of them, despite how short he had been in Adjuchas given the desolation they knew he left behind as. They tried to keep an eye on him for the past weeks. His presence took some of the pressure off. Without warning, Hisashi sensed something at the last second and dodged to the side, something gouging a deep trench across his carapace, covering his chest, causing a loud screech to echo. Thankfully, since it was a mostly superficial wound, his healing was already stitching it back together. It would seem Grimmjow hadn't used his fastest speed when attacking Apache before and was now taking us seriously, meaning Hisashi couldn't afford any distractions. His speed was still able to keep up with the speed-based Grimmjow and his strength far outstripped him, but they were still close enough to where Grimmjow had been able to use his momentary lapse in focus to inflict a light wound on him. That was close. He sweated. If I hadn't dodged at the last moment, that was aiming directly for my mask, which could have been bad for my future if my route to Vasto Lorde had been cut short. Answer: system would be able to repair a damaged mask, though doing so would cost a significant amount of energy. So much so that all progress made in the last weeks would be for naught. Damn, well that's a relief, though I can't afford to lose weeks of progress due to a moment of inattention. He thought. He narrowed his eyes, paying close attention for any sudden movements they made. But this wasn't something that was going to last. He guessed they could probably match the enemy's overall power, but that would still mean at least some of them dying, or possibly even all of them. The three of you need to retreat. I'll keep them occupied, he told the trio without even looking at them. Oh my, our strong hero. I'll believe in you, Sung Sun said slyly, happy to jump at any chance to escape even at his cost. Thanks, was all Mila Rose said. Who said we even needed your help? Was of course Apache's response. She just might be a tsundere if she keeps up this way. Grimmjow growled at them, causing his lackeys to start moving in on them to prevent their escape. Hisashi charged a Sero from his mouth, which made them swiftly turn, taking a defensive position instead while the trio started escaping. Grimmjow immediately countered with his own Sero, meeting Hisashi's in the middle, causing an explosion of energy that forced everyone back. Before he had a chance, the Grimmjow's team started charging and firing their own Seros at him, trying to box him in. Using his high dexterity and footwork, he managed to weave between the repeated beams like a dance, though staying safe was taking up most of his concentration. This would be a lot easier to deal with if he could just either run or kill them, but that was exactly what he was trying to avoid. Before he could clearly notice it, a white flash passed by home while he continued dodging and weaving, separating one of his arms above the elbow. Shit, that's actually going to take some time to regenerate, Hisashi stressed. It was Grimmjow who now stood with part of Hisashi's arm in his jaws before crunching down on it, causing it to be completely destroyed. The others weren't letting up though, as they continued firing off Seros at him to keep him occupied. Although a strategy that couldn't be kept up for long due to the energy expenditure, it was very effective at creating openings for Grimmjow to exploit. Hisashi used his illusions to hide one of the remaining arms and the stump from sight to make it harder to target and easier to make surprise attacks with it. The bull-looking Adjuchas took this opportunity to chase after the three that were escaping. Hisashi pushed his speed to the max by pumping his blood into overdrive on his legs, cutting of his pursuit by swiftly chopping off one of his hind legs. Although going over the physical limits with Blur could damage his body, as long as he didn't go too hard, his high-speed regeneration would take care of the micro damage in mere moments. One of the benefits of using the skill as a hollow as opposed to the human Quincy still relying on their weak human physique and regeneration. Although he didn't want to kill Grimmjow or his buddies, severe injuries were fine. Missing a leg for a while wasn't going to kill him. 52 Passion. With one of their allies incapacitated, the others doubled down on their assault, giving the trio more of a chance to escape, as the full focus was now in Hisashi after he proved to be a very real threat to them. Grimmjow managed to add a bunch of additional cuts and scratches to him, but didn't manage to cause another significant injury again, as Hisashi was able to pay more attention to Grimmjow again now that there was one less ally backing him up. As the fight continued, Grimmjow was also growing more and more aggravated, which made his attacks easier to read too. Not long after, the blasts being fired were also slowing down, as they had started running out of energy and had to start physically backing up Grimmjow instead, which they were much more hesitant about, seeing how he had easily physically overpowered one of them already. Slowly their injuries were piling up, since except for Grimmjow none of the others could even defend against the arm he had hidden using his illusions, allowing him to quickly pile up a lot of relatively light injuries on them once they came into the melee, speeding up the drain on their stamina, which was now being used both for fighting him and healing the many non-fatal wounds he was inflicting on them. Only Grimmjow was in mostly good shape, as he managed to even dodge most attacks from the hidden arm using his high reaction speed and improved senses. Hisashi even made sure to stab the more humanoid members to drain what memories he could to improve his own bipedal combat abilities now that his physique was slowly becoming more human again after passing the Gillian stage. Although he wasn't able to pierce them for extended durations, which would allow him to copy most of their skills and techniques, but every little edge he could get he would take. The combat had significantly slowed down, and he was hoping the trio had managed to get far enough to where these guys wouldn't be able to catch up with them in their current worn-out state. He made sure to focus most of his attacks on their legs when he could, as he would rather slow down their chase than reduce their offensive capabilities. By now 2 more were down for the count, leaving it with just him, Grimmjow, and 3 of the other Adjuchas in their clash. Although Grimmjow was visibly exhausted, his eyes hadn't let up. Quite the opposite, they contained far more fire than they had at the beginning. Fuck, he isn't going to treat me like he does Ichigo and go around repeatedly harassing me to battle him for the sake of his pride, is he? Hisashi worried when he saw the passion in Grimmjow's eyes. Mission completed. Active skill infusion gained. Skill infusion allows the user to share one of their own abilities with a third party within a short distance of the user themselves. The user infuses an amount of their spirit power into the target, and the skill will last until the infused spirit power has been used up by the skill. The consumption speed of spirit power depends on the skill that is being infused. Great, now to lose these guys. Hisashi thought, relieved he no longer needed to stick around anymore. It took a while to find an opening, but when he did, he gave Grimmjow a powerful kick to the sternum, sending him flying back. Well, it's been a pleasure, but this party has become a bit of a sausage fest, so adios, he told them sarcastically, emphasizing it with a little mocking bow as his figure disappeared using his illusion skill before he dashed away after the trio. He was fairly sure they should be fine given that the mission was completed and he got his reward. However, he had no clue if just escaping Grimmjow's band of merry men was enough to complete it, even if they ran into other danger while managing to escape. He managed to hear a loud, frustrated roar that could only be Grimmjow coming from behind, but even if he could somehow track him despite his illusory camouflage, he still wouldn't be able to keep up with him, let alone in his exhausted state. Hisashi couldn't wait for the upgrade to super speed regeneration. In these kind of long drawn-out battles, it became obvious how useful it was in both healing the minor and major injuries that accumulated and drained stamina, on top of it helping speed up his stamina recovery itself as well. He couldn't fathom why the majority of HALLOW sacrificed it when becoming a reincarnate. Though given his regeneration skill had already been upgraded once, he wasn't sure just how much better his was compared to the one that the average HALLOW had. Although maybe just over half an hour or so had passed while he was holding off Grimmjow's posse, it didn't take him near as long to catch up to the exhausted trio. Thankfully, it seemed his worry was for naught, as they seemed no worse off than they were when they left, ignoring them possibly being a little more tired from running non-stop since then. He did a quick scan of the area to make sure there were no sources for immediate concern, which ended up being quite clear. He cancelled his camouflaging while running beside them, causing them to jump and prepare for a fight until they realized it was just him. "I'm going to kill you one of these days," Apache yelled in rage, though she had no energy to actually even try. "Apache, not the time nor place. If it weren't for him, who knows what would have happened." Sung Sun cut her off before she could continue, and Apache for the first time had the decency to look at least somewhat embarrassed regarding her behavior. Sung Sun quickly turned back to face Hisashi and lowered her head. "Thanks for saving us, we would have died if you weren't near," she told him. "Yes. Quite the coincidence I was nearby." He teased back at her, ribbing them for regularly tracking him over the past 3 months. "Well, it doesn't hurt to run into someone so strong," she replied shamelessly, acting like she didn't have a clue what he was referring to. At least her playful behavior was easier to deal with than Apache's form of hard-headed and brashness. 53 Quit playing games. Mila Rose just quietly bowed her head in thanks without feeling the need to add anything, unlike the other two. He wasn't sure if it just took longer for her to open up, or if she really was just the quiet type unlike the other two. Thankfully, she seemed easygoing enough, at least when compared to Apache. They all still seemed kind of antsy looking at the surroundings, worrying that they might still be tracked by Grimmjow's group after everything they went through. Hisashi, with his enhanced senses though and the knowledge how far they had made it, was fairly certain they wouldn't be keep up with them, let alone track them down. As long as they could make it back to their lair to join back up with Tier Harel, they would be safe even without him there to protect them. "I'll escort you ladies back to your lair just to be safe. Is that okay with you?" he said to reassure them. "Oh my, what a gentleman," Sung Sun responded playfully. "Whatever, HF." Apache harumphed. That was probably the best he was going to get from her for now, though improvement was Improvement. What's that, Apaxi? Cat got your tongue? He asked her teasingly. That's Emilio for you, she said, stomping her hoofs in irritation. He decided to not push her anymore for now, no matter how fun it was to push her buttons and tease her. Okay, you two love birds. Let's get going before they do catch our trail, Sung-sun said to get them back on track, causing Hisashi to chuckle, and Apaxi just looked away, deciding it was best to ignore her friend. It wasn't like she wasn't used to Sung-sun's teasing. Everyone agreed, so they started rushing towards their lair at their fastest sustainable pace. It was easy to keep up with them for Hisashi due to his insane dex stat, to the point where it was little more than a jog to him. When they finally made it to the lair a couple hours later, they found it empty. Harel must have things of her own to do, or she is out looking for these three, Hisashi thought to himself. I'll wait here with you guys until Harel comes back. Unless you all are in the mood for a group date, he says, joking playfully. That's Harel-sama, you bug, Apaxi says, no longer able to contain her frustration once she feels the disrespect isn't for her, but rather their leader now. Hisashi chuckles and looks at himself before teasingly responding, you're right. I am indeed a bug. But this one can crush you until your juicy insides come out. He decided to press on now that they are secure. At least it is something to amuse himself, and he is sure Sung-sun appreciates it. Gah! Make him shut up, she yells back, knowing she can't attack him simply for being annoying, most of all after he saved the three of them. Realizing this wasn't going to ease her frustration though, Sung-sun chuckled mirthfully and decided to egg her on some more by chiming in, you know you two talk the most out of all of us, is this how you flirt? Shut up, Sung-sun, you're supposed to be on my side, she responds, getting flustered by being attacked from both sides. Ara. But you're being so cute, she continued teasing her. At this point Apaxi just grumbled and sat down T0 the side, where Mila Rose had settled down, trying to ignore the two of them. It was times like these he realized how mind-numbingly boring Hueco Mundo was for regular HALLOW. Your options literally were fight, do nothing. There was no entertainment, and socialization was far and few between. Eventually he thought of something they could do to pass the time, even as a bunch of HALLOW without opposable thumbs, or in Sung-sun, Apaxi and his cases no fingers at all. He took them outside and taught them how to play tic-tac-toe in the sand. At least it was something to do, and unlike having a conversation, which both Apaxi and Mila Rose, who were pretty bad conversational partners, at least to him they at least seemed to enjoy playing a game as a change of pace. He managed to get a little closer to Sung-sun, who actually seemed to enjoy talking with him, though he felt like though not much better, and despite a few frustrated outbursts when she lost, Apaxi did seem to loosen up some towards him by playing together. If he considered getting yelled at and cussed out marginally less as loosening up. Now that he didn't have the constant hunt to distract him, he did end up also ruminating a bit, which led him to realize he was missing his sister and Masaki. Not that the trio was that terrible as far as company went. Even Apaxi grew on him as he got more used to her abrasiveness, plus messing with her was fun. You bastard. Apaxi huffed and erased their game of tic-tac-toe that she just lost when Harel came back. Although it was hard to tell the passage of time in Hueco Mundo, Hisashi was fairly certain quite a few hours had passed. What are you doing? Harel asked. Her expression seemed neutral, but she sounded somewhat curious. I want to play with you, Harel. Same. I hate playing with this guy, Apaxi said as she jumped up to greet Harel. Hisashi just shook his head at the disparity between how Apaxi treated Harel and literally anyone else. He really wondered what Harel had done to earn such deep loyalty from the Trebuchets, despite this not being the norm for HALLOW. She really was the reliable and respected Nei-san to the three. Hey Harel. Long time no see. Good to see you again though, Hisashi said cheerfully. Long time? Harel asked with some confusion evident. I guess to most HALLOW, most of all high-ranking ones like Adjuchas and above, a few months or even years counts for nothing. He sighed inwardly. 54 with my heart. Of course. Every moment spent without you lovely ladies feels too long, Hisashi joked dramatically. Not near long enough, Apaxi responded viciously. He could almost see the smirk despite her dear face. He acted like he was experiencing a sudden heartache. How can you play with my heart? He said dramatically. Sadly, Harel, the only one he could find attractive in their current form, simply ignored his playful banter as usual. Oh, we all missed our little boy toy too, Sung-sun responded back flirtatiously. Mila Rose followed Harel's lead though and simply ignored him. Hisashi would have rolled his eyes if he could, given how he was 90% sure that the three of them had been following him to keep an eye on him. So, what has my favorite girl been up to? He asked Harel. I guess since you went out of your way to save the three of them I can share a little more. I was tracking the movements of Las Noches. They have been behaving strangely recently. The reason I had the girls track you down originally was because I believed you were related to it, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Harel answered him, still completely ignoring his teasing. Should he act like he has no clue about Las Noches? He wondered to himself for a moment, but quickly decided that if she was going to be more open he should at least do a little of the same. What is going on with them? Is Berrigan doing something? He asked. He is making unusual movements. She says with a nod. In what way? He asked curiously. He was sure Aizen must be well into preparing his transition from captain to king of Las Noches, replacing Berrigan if he hadn't already secretly. He has been having his underlings gather powerful Adjuchas to Las Noches for unknown reasons. Unfortunately, getting in to find out what for isn't that easy. She answered him truthfully. Harel looked slightly unsure as she looked between him and her underlings. It seemed she had finally made up her mind about something. Although I don't entirely agree with your method, something big is going on and we don't really have anyone else as an option. I would like to propose some kind of alliance to investigate and deal with whatever Berrigan is planning, she finally told him. Well, your three girls already love me so much. How could I not partake, he says teasingly. Fuck you. Apache yelled at him indignantly. Gladly, he responded back to her immediately, which caused her to go silent, looking away in embarrassment. Seeing Apache down for the count, Sung Sun couldn't hold back her laughter. Ahem. Let's stay on topic, Harel said awkwardly. Of course, my queen. Hisashi responded while raising one of his blade as if he was saluting. He was enjoying letting off some steam by actually interacting with people in a somewhat normal way. As normal as bantering with three high-level hollow could be. The conversations he had with them were the only ones keeping him a little sane over months of endlessly killing hollow. Harel simply deadpanned in response. He felt she needed to learn to loosen up after however many centuries spent in Hueco Mundo. She was probably the most soft-hearted hollow in this entire place, but living among almost only creatures that wanted to kill and consume her for this long had given her a very cold exterior. He would break through it eventually if it were up to him. I believe I'm getting close to breaking through to Vasto Lorde. At that point we would have two, and Berrigan should be less of a concern. I've been hearing rumors that something big is happening in Las Noches though, he said, knowing Berrigan was not truly what they should be concerned about. I've even heard a crazy one saying someone saw the Shinigami in Hueco Mundo. Do you believe it? He said. He couldn't outright tell them, but he definitely needed to make sure they were on high alert and acting cautious. That's unlikely. Maybe they gained another Vasto Lorde, Harel said. Harel-sama, we can't be too cautious, Sung Sun added. Hisashi nodded to lend credence to her opinion. Like they can do anything to Harel-sama, Apache finally chimed in after recovering from her embarrassment. She had full faith in Harel's capability. Do you want her to get hurt, dum-dum? Sung Sun insulted her snarkily. Okay. Calm down, you two. Harel said sternly. Yes, Harel-sama. The two responded in unison. He had to chuckle at seeing how well she had trained them. I think it would be good to be very cautious and gather information regarding the changes in Las Noches before making any bigger moves, Hisashi said. Harel nodded slowly. Okay, we can go with that for the moment. What do you two think? She asked Apache and Sung Sun. If you agree, Harel-sama, then I guess I do too, Apache said, glaring at Hisashi. I think that's smart, Harel-sama, Sung Sun also agreed. Given how many hours it's been since we lost their chase, I think you all are safe. Even if they do somehow still catch you, Harel is here now, so I'll be heading back out and work hard at achieving Vasto Lorde, Hisashi said. I'll miss you ladies, he teased while walking out. Apache snorted, not wanting to give him any more ammo than he already had. Oh, I'll look forward to our next time, Sung Sun responded playfully. Be careful, Harel said. It seemed though slow he was slowly working his way through her armor. Even if she still acted cold, at least she was concerned about him now. He left behind their cave and rushed back to his hunting grounds at full speed. He needed to get to Vasto Lorde soon. both for his own goals, but the four hollow girls were growing on him, and with him interfering in canon, their safety wasn't even guaranteed while meeting the Arrancar. He needed to get stronger as soon as possible. 55 Steak Dinner. Reina was out having a meal with Masaki. They hadn't been able to see each other in a while because Masaki was reconnecting with her family. After how much time they had spent together, they had become quite close and missed each other. This was the first time she had some time to catch up. They decided to enjoy a nice dinner to celebrate. "So how have things been?" Reina asked curiously. "It was a lot. My husband was being his usual silly self, but I know he is just using that to cover his feelings. As for Yuzu and Karin, it took a while, but they are starting to slowly open up more. Karin is the most difficult one. She has been struggling at school. It hurts knowing I wasn't able to be there for them for so long," she said, getting caught up in her melancholy. "Yeah. I know we tried to prepare, but there's only so much we could do," Reina said, nodding in agreement. She was enjoying a nice medium rare A5 Wagyu steak that practically melted in her mouth with each bite and a sip of the paired red wine to bring it all together. Masaki sighed. "As for Ichigo, I can't believe my husband was looking the other way with everything that happened. I had to make sure to correct his behavior," she said exasperatedly. Reina chuckled. "I'm sure you showed him his place," she responded. "Oh yes, I did," Masaki said with a warm smile before turning serious. "I just hope Ichigo is safe," she said. "Hisashi made sure he survived the first encounter with Soul Society, but now it's up to him and his friends there," she said before taking a slow sip of her wine. "I hope Hisashi is safe too," she said with a sigh. "You know just as well as me that he's probably fine. Unlike my son who takes after his father, Hisashi is too smart to get caught off guard," Masaki said, doing her best to reassure Reina. I know, Reina said with a light smile breaking onto her lips. "Enough about me though, what have you been up to?" Masaki asked. "Mostly work and training," Reina answered. She had been throwing herself into her company and training to distract from her worries regarding Hisashi. He hadn't told her a lot about Hueco Mundo, but what little he had told her had convinced her it was a very hostile place. "You can't just bury yourself in work," Masaki told her, concerned about her well-being. "You're right, but I'm here with you now." "Right," Reina agreed. "I've been a little worried. Lately I've been feeling like I'm being watched. I think the stress might be making me paranoid," she said with a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, maybe take some time off work and delegate some of it to your subordinates. You can always come to visit me," Masaki said. "You're right. Being honest, I probably barely need to be there. We're so far ahead of the competition, and now that the other programmers are up to speed enough on the code to handle at least all the minor updates and bug fixes, I really only need to be involved with the larger changes and updates that come once a year. At this point we're practically printing money as the contracts come in," Reina said. "Training is progressing slowly as usual, not too much new to share there. It's only been a couple of weeks since our last shared session after all," she continued. "You need to get some hobbies, Reina," Masaki said with concern. "I have hobbies," Reina retorted. "Like? You know I lived with you for years, right?" Masaki deadpanned. Reina sighed in defeat. Yes, Mom," she said. "Hey. I'm only a bit older than you," Masaki responded, indignantly nursing her wine. "Try a few years," Reina said with a smirk. "You bitch," Masaki responded before breaking into laughter. Reina couldn't hold back her own laughter and joined her. "This place is really good," Masaki said, taking another bite of her steak. "Yeah, it's been open for over a decade. It's only recently I've been able to afford eating here," Reina said. "Now for the juicy stuff. How has it been finally ending your dry spell?" she teased. Masaki blushed heavily and started drinking more of her wine to escape the line of questioning. "Come on. You can tell me," Reina continued to pester her. Unfortunately, she didn't manage to get any juicy details from Masaki. Reina sighed in defeat. "Never mind. How about anything else? What's up in Karakura?" she asked. "Other than beating off Kisuke?" Masaki asked. Reina chuckled. "Oh. Maybe there is some interesting gossip after all," she said. Masaki started laughing. "I almost wish. No, it's always experiment this and experiment that with him. When he encounters something new he just can't help himself. Nothing a good beating can't help though," she explained. After their steak dinner they enjoyed some desserts and coffee, making the most of the little time both of them had away from their responsibilities. We have to do this again sometime soon, Reina said excitedly, feeling more at ease than she had since Hisashi had left. Yeah, I haven't been able to unwind since going back to Karakura, Masaki said, but she was smiling happily. Reina knew how hard it had been for her to stay away from her family for so long. She knew Hisashi had his reasons, but that didn't make it much better. All she could do was trust in him though. He hadn't let her down so far, and he knew how much he had struggled to improve things not only for himself, but also those around him. The Kurosakis had their mother back. She herself was now rich and powerful. She wishes he could reveal himself to their parents too, but he had explained enough about the supernatural world for her to understand that was probably not for the best, at least until they were powerful enough to protect them. Shortly after they left the restaurant, a tall older gentleman with short black hair, a thick mustache that was sitting on the other end of the restaurant, got up and followed them out. He was wearing a shirt, waistcoat and dark leather strap over his right eye. 56 lording over them. Back in Hueco Mundo. System, how long has it been? He asked. He had finally managed to achieve his goal, but it had taken almost twice as long as he had expected. Turns out mass murdering the very slowly replenishing population of high-level hollow makes them harder to find. Not only that, but they started being more cautious, making the fewer around even harder to find. Answer, 4 months 22 days 0 hours 32 minutes 41 seconds. Can you give me a summary of my progress during that time? He continued. Plus 5,207,280 XP from hollow. Plus 255,200 spirit power from hollow. Plus 25 levels. Plus 25 stat points. Okay. System, show me my status. He requested. Equals status panel equals. Name, Saito Hisashi. Soul age, 58. Race, hollow. Rank, Adjuchas. Level, 187-212. XP, 18,249 225,780. Equals stats equals. Strength, 130. Dexterity, 228. Constitution, 60. Intelligence, 100. Spirit power, 792,882 minus 1,048,082. Available stat points, 0 minus 25. Equals passive skills equals. Spiritual energy absorption. Super speed regeneration. Acidic touch. Silencioso. Equals active skills equals. Soul body separation. Spirit power concealment. Illusory aura. Blute. Energy blade. Transcribe. Hachijio Sogai. Sero. Kumin. Negation. Skill infusion. Please add all my free points to dexterity. He asked the system. Dexterity, 228 minus 253. Available stat points, 25 minus 0. He was feeling a familiar sensation again. Like he was a balloon stretched to its bursting point and could blow up any moment if he stopped suppressing it. He needed to evolve again, and this time he needed a somewhat secure location. After last time, he wouldn't mind a little extra peace of mind. In Hueco Mundo there was only one group of individuals he trusted though. He made his way to their cave base. It seemed he was in luck because all 4 of them were already there. Hey Harel, it's been a while. Hisashi said. Harel smiled. Yes, it has, she said. So what brings you here? She asks him curiously. I've reached the threshold for Vasto Lorde and am currently holding back my transformation, he explained. Harel seemed surprised, but didn't ask him for further information. Everyone in Hueco Mundo had their own secrets. What? Apache yelled indignantly when she heard what he said. How are you already transforming? She continued. Calm down, Apache. He'll tell us when he is ready, Harel said. Calmly. Congratulations. You aren't going to leave us poor little women behind once you don't need us anymore, right? Sung Sun said teasingly. How could I ever abandon my harem palace, he joked. Apache furiously kicked him with her hind leg, but it wasn't able to do much damage to him. You bastard. Who's your harem? I hope you explode when you try to transform, she yelled before storming off. Sung Sun merely chuckled. Oh. Well then you better take good care of us. Husband. She said seductively. Even Mila Rose couldn't help smiling at Apache's little tantrum. So why are you here? Harel asks in curiosity. I was hoping to have you watch over me while I transform. Just to be safe, Hisashi explained. Of course. We'd gladly help. Well, most of us at least, Harel said. They ended up finding him a secluded place where he set up his barrier in preparation for the burst of energy that would be unleashed during his evolution. The four ladies were watching him attentively. Both because they were concerned for him and also because he was somewhat an oddity among the Hollow. Not only that, but other than Harel, the other three had never seen or experienced a Hollow becoming a Vasto Lorde, and a small part of them hoped witnessing it might help them in achieving the same themselves in the future. Do you think he can actually do it? Apache asked with some worry. Oh, you're able to be honest when he can't hear you. Sung Sun asked teasingly. Shut up, Sung Sun. Apache yelled in embarrassment. Just let it go, you know how she is, Mila Rose told Sung Sun. But it's so much fun, Sung Sun said happily. Something is happening, Harel warned and shielded the others behind her just to be safe. Large amounts of ambient spirit energy started swirling around Hisashi, entering his body like he was some kind of black hole. His body started lighting up from the sheer amount of energy being crammed in until he was shining bright white. His form started shrinking until he was only 6'4", 193 centimeters. All of his muscles compacted until his silhouette looked mostly human aside from still having 2 pairs of arms and a set of wings on his back. As his transformation progressed, the spirit pressure was growing so powerful it was distorting the very air around him. The Trebuchets gasped at the changes, but Harel was unsurprised, having gone through the same herself. Eventually the pressure was suppressed and the light died down, revealing his new look. He had 4 arms ending in blades that, like his mask, had a bone-like texture to them. His mask had receded to his above his mouth and stopped covering his eyes, revealing parts of his human-like face, and a full head of hair was growing from below his mask, revealing a black mane. His mask had grown to cover most of his body, forming a kind of insectoid armor, leaving only the lower half of his face, neck and pale chiseled torso uncovered from the bone-like material. It looks like he's done, Harel said happily. Wow. Apache stammered. Mila Rose nodded in approval while Sung Sun just licked her lips. Evolution completed. Rank Adjuchas minus Vasto Lorde. Strength 130 minus 325. Dexterity 253 minus 633. Constitution 60 minus 150. Intelligence 100 minus 250. Spirit power 1,048,082 minus 2,620,205. Active skill Sonido gained. Sonido. A high-speed movement technique utilized by Hollow and a reincar, allowing them to move faster than the speed of sound. The speed achieved is dependent on the user's skill in using the technique and their base physical capability. Mission completed. Super speed regeneration minus ultra speed regeneration. Ultra speed regeneration. Improved version of super speed regeneration that increased the recovery speed. The user can regenerate everything but their mask near instantly, as long as their body has enough spirit power to sustain the recovery. Damage to the user's mask can still be recovered, but will take longer depending on the extent of the damage. 57 Stretching. Hisashi opened his eyes, standing in the middle of a large crater left by the explosion of energy his transformation had caused. It was a rather strange sensation being back in a somewhat human form. He felt so small, but also nimble. Like he had gained a great improvement to the control of his body. The only area not completely destroyed was where Harel had guarded the others. Though hard to tell with her mask covering her mouth, he was fairly certain she was smiling at him. He could feel energy filling every part of his body. Despite shrinking to around a third of the size he was before, his energy had actually grown manifold. He could easily crush a couple of his former self. He wasn't sure if Harel had been this much stronger than him before, or if it was just him being an outlier. Unless something had changed from his previous evolutions, he was likely already the most powerful Vasto Lorde the moment he evolved. That didn't mean he necessarily had the strength to handle all a reincar though. He suspected an reincar transformed from an Adjuchas was likely at the same level as a Vasto Lorde, let alone what power a Vasto Lorde would be after transforming into an reincar. Ulquiorra, one of the few examples of such, was ridiculously powerful, and he had no clue how he would stack up to someone like that, not to mention someone like Aizen that managed to control a group of such beings. He looked at the blades his arms ended up in that looked sleeker, but more deadly than ever before. A quick swipe of his arm caused a blade of wind pressure to create a in the sand beside him, sending a cloud of sand out. His little audience couldn't help but cough from the sand he kicked up. Hey! Watch what you're doing! Apache yelled angrily. Even if he had become scary strong to her, she wasn't going to let that control how she treated him. Still testing his new powers, he spread two wings, and before they noticed, his was behind Apache, slapping her ass with the side of his blade, which caused her to jump out of shock. The only one that even managed to keep up with his speed was Harel. For the rest, he just disappeared and reappeared behind Apache as if he teleported. With my wings, so neato and raised dexterity, I'm not even sure how fast I am anymore. He muttered, inwardly marveling at his new capabilities. What do you think you're doing? Apache screeched indignantly once she realized what had happened, turning around as fast as she could to prevent any further spanks. Sung Sun, seeing another opportunity for some fun with Apache's back, now turned to her, also spanked her with the tip of her tail. Why are you all bullying me? Apache cried out. It's fun. Hisashi and Sung Sun ended up saying at the same time, causing him to smile at his partner in crime. Harel couldn't help but sigh. However, she seemed a bit happy and a little relieved for some reason. Hisashi wasn't sure if it was because she was worried about him failing or encountering problems during his transformation, or was instead worried about how he would behave afterwards. Whatever it was, at least it wasn't a bad thing. Mila Rose looked like she was hesitating to say something. Eventually she seemed to give up and left it as though. Mind helping me get used to this new form? Hisashi asked Harel. At this point she was the only one of them that could still push him and force him to adjust to his new abilities. Alright, she responded while nodding. She ended up facing him in the crater he left behind. With his transformation, her vibrant emerald eyes trained on him for any movement. Although she had been able to keep track of him when he spanked Apache, keeping up with him would actually be quite hard. His speed was abnormal even for a Vasto Lorde. Just one of the many mysteries surrounding Hisashi that she would love to uncover. He was a total unknown Gillian not even a year ago, and still a relatively unknown to anyone but them. Yet here he was standing across from her, a Vasto Lorde just like herself. It had taken her centuries to become a Vasto Lorde just from the Adjuchas stage, let alone how much time she had spent all the way from Gillian. /n in Hueco Mundo time, less time has passed on Earth and Soul Society. Not only that, but even for them who were relatively docile Hollow, he was a strange one. His behavior much more human, something she had never encountered with an Adjuchas. Even more so than any Vasto Lorde she had met, including herself. He suddenly burst towards her, swiping at her like a pincer with blades coming from both directions. She managed to deflect one blade, giving her an opening she could use to just barely dodge. His growth had been insane. She wasn't even sure she would be able to handle him if this first clash was an indication. She even noticed his sprit pressure was heavier than any she had experienced, even Berrigan. It was like she was restrained simply by its presence. Like moving through molasses. Before she could even adjust from the first clash, he appeared from her right, swinging. It was too late to dodge, forcing her to block. Unfortunately, he had 4 arms. Even though she managed to engage 2 of them in the bind, 2 more came swinging at her. As a last resort, she burst forth with her entire strength, barely pushing him back, but just enough for the 2 blades to miss her by a hair's breadth. It had only been the second clash, and she already felt like she was running out of breath between the rapid, ceaseless attacks and the abnormal spirit pressure, both causing her to expend more stamina than she otherwise would have. 58 considerations. Hisashi was extremely excited. Now that he was sparring with Harel, an actual Vasto Lorde, he was getting an idea of his newfound strength. He was completely outclassing her in his speed while still at least matching her in strength. Though he was still adjusting to his sudden raise in power, he could already tell when he did master it, he would be able to deal with Harel pretty easily, which was good since he knew she was already the second most powerful Hollow if you don't consider a Reincar. Knowing this, he finally felt a little relief. He might not have the power to dominate in Hueco Mundo just yet, but he definitely had enough power to move around without needing to worry he might get destroyed the moment he runs into the wrong person. He had been rushing through things, trying to evolve as quickly as possible. The only interaction he even had with others for the past months beyond fighting and killing had been with Harel's crew. Harel, not one to take a beating, went on the offensive, hoping to perform better when not on the back foot by relying on her experience rather than her physical abilities. She clashed with him, and at first she regained an upper hand with his having to use all 4 of his arms to block her slashes. As the battle progressed, Hisashi was learning and adjusting though. At first he got to the point where he was able to block her with only 3 of his arms, eventually even getting it down to only needing 2 by improving his stance and adjusting where and how he received her blows. He could have easily used his illusions and trickery to beat her much faster or spamming energy-based attacks with his ridiculous levels of spirit power. However, this spar wasn't about defeating her easily or at all. It was about improving his skills. He couldn't be sure there would never be an enemy that could see through his illusions. If there ever was, then he would have to rely purely on his physique and swordsmanship to beat them. Given how most of his battles had been up until now, he had mostly relied on his physique and illusion skills to steamroll the enemies he could and avoid those he couldn't. Until now, though, he hadn't had any enemies that used swords, and that would likely change soon enough. Both Arrancar and Shinigami primarily used swords after all. Harel was the perfect person to help him shore up this weakness of his. She might not be an Arrancar yet, but with her right arm ending in what was pretty much already a broadsword, she definitely was a swordsman with centuries of experience in combat. Who better to spar and learn from? There might be better swordsmen among the Shinigami in Serte that could teach him. However, all of Soul Society was under the watch of Wandenrake, Ewok's empire hidden in the shadow of Serte. If he didn't discover him, then Aizen likely would have. Both of them were individuals he would rather not be on the radar for. That was even ignoring the 99% chance of any Shinigami killing him the moment he showed up. Hollow didn't have the best reputation among any of the other factions, and for good reason. Although with every evolution a Hollow became more rational, most of them are more like a talking beast than sentient being until they become a Reincar. Harel's group is a major outlier. The only other Hollow he can remember being of a similar disposition based on the show before becoming an Reincar was Nelliel. Most Hollow were still pretty awful individuals after becoming a Reincar. Since both of them had near limitless stamina, they actually sparred for well over an hour before they called it a day without even breaking a sweat. Although part of him hated becoming a Hollow, he had to be thankful for some aspects of it. It would have been much worse if he hadn't gotten a system that allowed him to keep his sanity. If not for that, he would have probably been either eliminated by the Shinigami or consumed by another Hollow before even managing to become an Adjuchas. Now, however, he was extremely powerful and near immortal, so despite the many struggles he had to go through to get here, he could have done much worse in his second life. The Trapeaches were practically stunned to silence during and for a while after their spar. They had never witnessed a battle between two Vasto Lorde after all. The only two they were aware of were Harel and Berrigan, the latter of which they avoided to the best of their ability. While Hisashi was left wondering what his next steps should be now that he became a Vasto Lorde. Of course he wanted to become an Arrancar, but he was still worried. Unlike the regular evolutions of a Hollow, becoming an Arrancar would require tearing off his Hollow mask, something which the vast majority of Hollow didn't survive without the assistance of the Hogyoku created by Uraara Kisuot. It was probably now already in the possession of Aizen at this point. His options would be to either risk it and tear off his mask, hoping his will was powerful enough to keep his soul together to complete the transformation, or hope the system would act and help him through it, neither of which were a guarantee. Or he would somehow need to get transformed with the Hogyoku. New mission: allow the system to absorb the Hogyoku. Reward: evolution into a perfect Arrancar, giving the host the best offered by being Hollow and Shinigami. Oh shit. Hisashi thought, seeing the new mission. It was both a bit terrifying and tempting. He would gain immense power, but at the same time he wasn't exactly thrilled at the idea of stealing the Hogyoku. At this point it was either in the highest security prison in Soul Society with Rukia or already in the hands of Aizen. The different flow of time between Earth, Hueco Mundo and Soul Society making it hard to keep track between them all. 59 no longer alone. Having finished the spar, they all returned to the girls' cave hideout together. It looks like our husband will be more than able to protect us, poor little women, Sung Sun teased. Of course. You can rely on me. Hisashi joked in return. Even though they probably didn't need much protection, most of all when Harel was around, he would still do his best if it came to it. Currently he was the strongest Hollow out of all the ones he had met, but it was yet to be determined how he would stack up against the Arrancar faction he already knew was forming in secret. He wasn't sure exactly where and when in the timeline Aizen had taken over rule of Las Noches and started building the strength of his faction there, but it should have been going on for quite a while already before his break with Soul Society. He had just been hiding behind Berrigan until he didn't need to wear his mask for Soul Society anymore. Protect who? I don't need this bastard's protection. Apaxi yelled in a fluster, finally breaking out of the stupor witnessing the spar had left her in. She was growing on him. She acted like she hated him, but along with Sung Sun, out of all 4 of them, those 2 interacted with him the most by far. She just wasn't very honest about her feelings and was easy to set off. Harel nods thoughtfully, though seeming to take his words seriously despite the joking tone. It seemed she was quite observant regarding his intentions despite being quite cold on the surface. She was probably the hardest to read, but from the show he knew deep down she cared. Mila Rose simply snorts. She was more than enough to take care of herself, but she couldn't help feeling a little warm inside. Hueco Mundo was a cold and unforgiving place, and in her long life there she had only managed to find a few others she could call friends, and they finally found another after so long. Now that we have you here, we might as well discuss what we have been able to find out, Harel said to get things back on track. I've been watching Las Noches from a distance. Berrigan seems to be more active than I've ever seen him, sending out groups of his hollow all over Hueco Mundo lately. I just haven't been able to determine the reason yet, she said with a pondering expression. Looking back up at them after breaking from her thoughts, she looked at her subordinates to ask, what about your investigation? The girls explained how they had been going around Hueco Mundo investigating and talking with the few hollow sentient and calm enough to not attack them right away. It seemed hollow were going missing all over the place, but no one was quite sure what was happening to them. Most just assumed they had been consumed, which wasn't that far-fetched. Even less so with how many hollow he saw she had been consuming for the past months since he got there. Another thing they heard about were some rumors going around about a human girl in Hueco Mundo hanging out with a group of hollow on the surface. With the investigations of Berrigan and the disappearances ongoing, they hadn't had a chance to check it out any further yet. I'll investigate it, Hisashi offered happily. With the new mission he received, he wasn't sure what to do about Aizen and the Arrancar. Should he join them? Should he sneak in using his illusions to try stealing the Hogyoku? Should he fight them along with Ichigo's crew when he attacks Las Noches? For now he would rather avoid it until he has had more of a chance to think about it, and this would be a good excuse as any. He also already had some suspicions as to what the rumors might be about and was quite curious about what he might find while investigating. If anything, it would be something different from the endless killing for a bit. Not that he would stop killing any aggressive hollow he did come across who would turn down free food after all. They hashed out their plans with further discussion. Harel and the Trebuchets were going to track the groups being sent out of Las Noches to see what they were doing rather than watching Las Noches itself for the moment, while he would search the surface to find out what the rumors were about. He might have his suspicions, but for them who didn't know about a reincar, something looking like a human in Hueco Mundo was out of the ordinary. Well, as always, I'll miss you beautiful ladies, but don't miss me too much, he said with a playful wink. He had missed being able to wink. One of the many things he was once again able to do after decades of being stuck with his hollow mask being his entire face. Finally it became more true to its name again and was more of a mask or helmet than covering absolutely every inch of his face. It definitely opened him back up to a whole world of expressions once again. Before he left, he made sure to temporarily impart his ultra-speed regeneration on all 4 of them. He was concerned they would soon be running into the hammerhead shark Arrancar that belonged to Baragan's faction, who came looking for revenge after Aizen turned him into an Arrancar. They were quite surprised when he imparted the skill, but it wasn't too crazy. There was a large variety of hollow with their own unique abilities after all. Compared to some of the other things they had seen him do, this was rather mundane by comparison. He could have imparted some of his more esoteric skills, but he was worried that might gain the wrong kind of attention from Aizen if he noticed. If he imparted them a skill belonging to the Shinigami or Quincy, or even worse his passive spiritual energy absorption skill, it would likely be recognized by Aizen, quickly turning them into his little guinea pigs. He wanted to help them, not harm them. With his large pool of spirit power, he was able to impart enough of it to grant them the skill for at least a couple of weeks, unless they ended up using it heavily. If they got into the fight while he was gone, they would at least have a good edge. He couldn't rely on things just magically going the way they went in canon after all, and he didn't want to lose the only friends he had in Hueco Mundo. It wouldn't give them the ability to do whatever they wanted, but the massive boost to their regeneration should give them a second life, and if the Trebuchets got attacked, it would give Harel more time to come to their rescue. He wasn't sure exactly how strong ultra-speed regeneration was just yet without more thorough testing, but from what little he did notice during his spar with Harel, his already impressive regeneration had seen an impressive bump. 60 The chase. It had been a couple of weeks scouring the sandy dunes that covered Hueco Mundo's surface under the cold moonlight for Hisashi. Although the forest of Menos might be dangerous, the mind-numbingly monotonous surface was by far the worst experience to him. At least with the life and death fight something was happening. He had come across some hollow, though very few, most of which he consumed, but his targets had eluded him. It was only now that Hisashi caught on to some promising tracks. He found a large gully-shaped track along with a bunch of footprints, all going in the same direction. After a day of tracing the tracks, he finally found the source. 3 hollows seemed to be chasing a little green-haired girl. A huge snake-like hollow, a large humanoid hollow with what looked like a huge Maori-like mask, and a human-sized and shaped hollow with an insect-like mask. If you looked closer though, the girl had a cracked skull-like hollow mask covering the very top of her head, indicating she was a reincar rather than a human. For hollow unaware of what a reincar were, it would make sense they believed she was human when seeing them from a distance. Though it looked like the other 3 hollow were hunting the little girl, it wasn't hard to tell they weren't serious given the lack of killing intent coming from them, and the tracks had been going on for far too long if this were truly some kind of hunt. It was just Nelliel and her Frakian, though in her current childlike form. Went by Nell 2. Given the description of the suspicious activity, this was pretty much what he had expected. The only humans in Hueco Mundo were more likely than not to be a reincar, and there was only one little girl a reincar that he was aware of in Hueco Mundo around this time. Nelliel was one of the highest ranking a reincar in Las Noches until she was ambushed by Enoitra, who was jealous of her, but couldn't defeat her in a direct clash. During the ambush, her mask was damaged, turning her from her powerful adult form into a weak little child with amnesia. Rather than finish her off, Enoitra preferred she suffer and kicked her out of Las Noches instead. The 3 hollow chasing her were simply her Frakian that followed her in exile despite her losing her memories. Hisashi considered simply leaving and reporting his findings to Harel, but it was also a good opportunity to introduce himself to what was pretty much the only other group of peaceful hollow besides Harel's group. Since there were so few of them, introducing himself and making a good impression might actually be very worthwhile. He was rather lacking in allies after all. On Earth he had his sister and Masaki. Maybe Ishin and Kisuke, but he didn't fully trust them yet since he hadn't actually gotten to know them yet. Sure, they were good guys in the show, but that was from the perspective as Ichigo as the protagonist. There was no telling how they would treat him a hollow. He hoped better now that Masaki should have returned and explained more about him, but you could never be too careful, so that made all of 2 guaranteed allies on Earth. In Soul Society he would trust no one currently and couldn't foresee that changing anytime soon. The Shinigami's, admittedly warranted, prejudice against hollow was only beaten by the Quincy. He wouldn't dare risk going out of his way to try befriending any Shinigami until he had the power to resist at least all the captains besides maybe Yamamoto, and even then he would prefer not to venture into Soul Society itself. Maybe Ichigo and Rukia would be in after she was rescued and Ichigo rehabilitated his relationship with Serte. He would hopefully at least have positive feelings once he found out Hisashi had actually twice saved and protected his mother. Which left Hueco Mundo where he only had Haribels, making 4 allies there. Adding them all up, he had a whopping 6 allies gained over the decades since his reincarnation. Adding 4 more would be nearly doubling them in one fell swoop. Not only that, but if Nelliel regained her adult form, she would also immediately become the most powerful ally. Haribel would only be able to match her after becoming an reincar, and even then it was questionable if she could beat Nelliel in her prime. Unlike Ichigo, he knew all 4 of them were friends and merely playing something akin to tag. Since Nelly was currently in her childish Nell 2 form, the best thing he could do was play along. He sped past the 3 chasing Nell 2, sweeping her up in his arms. "And you're caught," he said with a chuckle. She yelled when she was suddenly moving faster. The other 3 continued chasing after the 2 of them. "Oh no. We have to save her," the big chunky hollow yelled. "It's up to us." The skinny one chimed in. They were rather slow compared to Hisashi though, who wasn't even using his sonido nor the limits of his dexterity. Nell 2 was alternating between screaming, giggling and kicking her legs excitedly. After running far enough ahead for the 3 chasing them to be mere silhouettes in the distance, Hisashi stopped, waiting for the 3 chasing to catch up. No, faster, faster. Don't stop. We're playing endless chase." Nell 2 yelled. "If we don't give them the chance to catch up, it won't be fun for them, will it?" he asked her. Though mostly because he was fairly certain, unlike Nell 2, they didn't think he was playing along and instead were worried he was kidnapping Nell 2. She nodded seriously. Unlike her serious demeanor would indicate, though, she started climbing up his arm and shoulder until she managed to sit on his shoulder. So, what's your name, little one? He asked, turning his head to face her on his shoulder. I am Nell to the Arrancar, she said, proudly crossing her arms over her chest. What about you? She asked out of curiosity. 61 new friends. I'm Hisashi the Vasto Lorde. He responds, unsure of himself. Unlike her adult form, Nell's child form had a rather unique personality. He couldn't hate it though, it even reminded him a little of when his younger sister was still little. Hitachi. Nice to meet you, she responds happily with her lisp. No, please no. It's Hisashi. Hisashi. Please say it right. He said, sweating nervously. Hitachi. She responded excitedly, no change at all from the first time. She didn't even seem to be trying. Hisashi could only sigh in defeat. He knew trying to fix her pronunciation was a waste of time, but accepting how she said his name was just too embarrassing to accept. Shortly after, the other three finally caught up. Release Nell-sama right now. The skinny one yelled indignantly. Give her back. The chunky one bellowed. Hisashi could see tears of desperation in his eyes. Bawa. The snake cried out. Hitachi, run. Nell yelled while giggling. The three trying to save her looked surprised. Brothers, Nell-sama has been brainwashed. The skinny one said in a panic. What? We have to save her. The chunky one said, joining in on the panic. Hurry or we'll lose eternal pursuit. Nell too said, continuing to ignore their panic, adamant to win her game. Hisashi wasn't even sure how they were supposed to win at eternal pursuit. The skinny one makes a sudden desperate jump for them, but Hisashi sends him flying back into a nearby dune with a simple push kick. Pest! The chunky one yells, running after Pest, who was sent flying. Bawa. The snake cried in confusion, looking back and forth between the two groups. No. That's not how you play eternal pursuit. Don't bully them. Nell too cried out. Hisashi softly smacked her upside the back of her head with the side of his blade. Then tell them that, he chided her. Ouch, she said and pouted. After his warning, she leapt down from his shoulder and ran to the three to warn them. Though Hisashi gave her a good feeling, she also felt that he could be very dangerous from the pressure he gave off even when suppressing his spiritual pressure. It seemed even more dangerous than some of the other Arrancar she knew. Brothers. This is Hitachi. My new friend. She said happily. Hisashi. Hisashi yelled to make sure they understood what his name really was. One person calling him that was already enough of a disgrace. What? Are we being abandoned? Pest said in a distraught tone. Falling to his knees as if he had given up on life. Don Takaka patted him on the back. You'll be okay, I'm still your brother, he said to console Pest. Bawa lowered his head, crying sadly. No. We're still brothers. Nell too assured them. The three of them did a full 180 as if they hadn't been depressed seconds before. The three bowed humbly. Nice to meet ya, they said in unison. So who are you all? He asked them despite being very well aware of who they were. I'm Nell too said. You already told me that, Hisashi deadpanned. Nell too bonked herself on the head with her tiny fist while smiling deerfully. I'm Pestguadish, the skinny one said. I'm Don Takaka Bierston. The chunky one yelled. And united we are minus, they started in unison. The Neldimp Desert Thieves. Nell too completed the sentence. The Great Desert Brothers. Don Takaka completed the sentence. The three super-powered siblings of the Burning Sands. Pest completed the sentence. Bawa. The snake said. All four were yelling different endings at the same time while posing like Power Rangers, making it hard to understand. Are you all idiots? Hisashi asked incredulously. Idiots? Nell too asked with confusion. No, I'm a masochist. She said proudly. Hisashi sighed. Would you mind coming to see some friends of mine? Hisashi asked her. Of course. If they're your friends, they must be great. She said with a wide smile. She got back up on his back, grabbing onto the hair coming from under his mask to hold on to him. Hisashi started running at a speed that Nell's Frakian would be able to keep up at. Yahoo! She yelled excitedly, kicking his chest like he was her steed. Her Frakian was a lot less excited as they ran as fast as they could simply to keep up. They could only keep this up before they jumped on top of Bawa, who was able to move faster and for longer. To their surprise, when Bawa went faster and was catching up to Hisashi and Nell too, Hisashi simply smirked and increased his speed even further. Ha 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 ha, faster. Faster. If you go even faster, Nell will explode. Nell too yelled happily. Hisashi could only deadpan, remembering that child Nell had quite the potty mouth. Whether it was intentional or not, he wasn't sure. Bawa could only cry silently as he did his best to keep up with their new speed. Secretly, he wished the other two had never jumped on top of him so he could have kept up at the relaxed pace. It took quite a few days to get to the forest of Menos, which he needed to pass through to get to Harel's hideout. It would take a few more days to get through the forest and reach the hideout. Well, look who we have here. They suddenly heard someone say shortly after exiting the forest. Suddenly, a tall, muscular young man with light blue spiky hair walked out from behind one of the trees. He had a partial bone mask of a sharp-toothed mouth covering the right half of his jaw and green eyeliner-like marks on the lower and outer edges of his blue eyes. He was wearing a pure white hakama and jacket combination with black accents. A sword was tied to his waist with a black sash, and his hand was resting on it threateningly. 62 frustrations. Hisashi immediately went on high alert. Unexpectedly, it was Grimmjow Jagerjik, and he had managed to become an reincarnate since their last encounter. Normally Hisashi wouldn't be too concerned, but there was no way Nell 2 and her Frakian would be able to resist Grimmjow now that he was a reincarnate too. His eyes darted between the trees in the vicinity, but to his relief no one else was showing up and he couldn't sense any other powerful spiritual signature nearby. It seemed Grimmjow had become even more arrogant after turning into an reincarnate and decided to hunt him solo rather than allow his Frakian join him on this hunt. He should probably be thankful for Grimmjow's pride. It was dangerous enough with just him as an reincarnate. He didn't need his Frakian, also turned into a reincarnate, to join in on the battle. He had no delusions about being able to avoid a battle here. Grimmjow's pride would never let him walk away with how he had stomped on their prides last time around. They were quite close to the hideout already. He wasn't sure how, but Grimmjow had managed to catch his trail at some point. "How have you been?" "It's been a while after all," Grimmjow said venomously. Hisashi whispered the directions towards the hideout to Nell 2 while Grimmjow slowly stalked closer to them like a panther stalking its prey. "When you find an opportunity, or I tell you, run there as fast as you can," he whispered to her. "You've made me run all over the place looking for you," Grimmjow said. Nell 2 looked like she was on the verge of tears. Not only was Grimmjow putting out a lot of spiritual pressure, but it was absolutely dyed in his killing intent. Every hollow had an acute sense for killing intent growing up in Hueco Mundo, surrounded by those wishing to consume you to survive and grow. The other three were in an even worse state, cowering in fear. Before Grimmjow could take action, Hisashi grabbed Nell 2 by the scruff of her neck and tossed her to her Frakian. Thankfully, though she looked like a preteen girl, even as a damaged reincarnate, she was still quite resistant. "Oh!" Grimmjow said, looking between Hisashi and Nell 2's group. Suddenly he rushed after Nell 2 faster than they could respond with a wide grin. Hisashi dashed to intercept him, crossing his blades to block a punch he sent her way. His blades were shaking from the pressure Grimmjow was applying. "Finally! This is what I've been waiting for. I'm going to crush you!" Grimmjow yelled excitedly. "Get out of here!" Hisashi yelled at Nell 2. "They are weak and they make you weak." Grimmjow yelled and laughed almost maniacally while sending a flurry of punches his way, all of which he managed block. Though Grimmjow had gotten much faster than he used to be, speed was Hisashi's strongest aspect after all. The strength was where he was running into concerns, though. It seemed they were quite closely matched in it now, with him only being a bit stronger. So far Hisashi still held the upper hand, but Grimmjow was so arrogant he hadn't even unsheathed his Zanpakuto yet, let alone unleash his Resurrection, both of which would at least even the stakes and possibly even allow Grimmjow to exceed him. Nell 2 and her Frakian quickly recovered from their stupor. They jumped on Bawa and Nell 2 started giving it directions that it quickly followed, dashing away from the fight while Hisashi held back Grimmjow. He couldn't run this time, as he was sure if he did Grimmjow would go after Nell 2 in an attempt to force his hand again. Thankfully, due to his personality, Grimmjow wasn't too interested in weaklings and was also far more concerned with gaining back his pride by defeating Hisashi, leading to him to ignore them now that he was in the battle he desired. After a few failed clashes, Grimmjow jumped back. "You're stronger than I expected," he said while slowly unsheathing his Zanpakuto. Immediately he dashed back towards Hisashi. Unfortunately for him, between the two of them Hisashi actually had much more experience in the use of blades with Grimmjow still learning how to handle his Zanpakuto. They clashed a few times, repelling each other into the nearby trees of the forest of Menos. Their impacts were powerful enough to cause them to explode and fall upon impact. By that time they had already propelled themselves back at each other for the next clash though. The ringing of blades resounding far through the forest. No other hollow dared to approach though between the loud sounds of battle, destruction and the terrifyingly scare levels of spiritual pressure their clash was giving off. After countless clashes and Grimmjow's increasing frustration at his lack of Zanjutsu swordsmanship skills, when he landed on one of the trees he charged a red-tinted Sero in his hand. Hisashi immediately stretched his 4 blades in front of him with the tips pointing at each other. In front of each of them a red-black sphere formed until the 4 merged into a bigger sphere swirling with the same colors. Hisashi ended up firing his own Sero moments after Grimmjow had. The 2 Sero clashed in the middle. It resulted in a loud explosion that ended up pushing both of them back while uprooting the trees in range. The only thing left afterwards was a big circular crater devoid of forest. Seeing he had failed again, Grimmjow aggressively rubbed his hair in frustration while glaring at Hisashi before breaking out into a cackle. "Impossible, I'm the king and you aren't even in a rain car," he growled out. He breathed in deeply, trying to calm himself down some. "I can't believe you forced me to this point, but I'll make sure you pay," he said. Grimmjow held his Zanpakuto horizontal while placing his fingers on it like a claw. The Zanpakuto started glowing. Spirit power started swirling around him violently. "Grind! Pantera!" Grimmjow yelled out, drawing his claw across the side of the blade. The gathered spiritual power exploded in all directions. 63 tied up. When the disturbance died down, it revealed Grimmjow's resurrection form. His hands and feet hard turned into black claws. His mask had spread across his entire body with the exception of some of his chest and face like some kind of armor. He had blades on his forearms and calves. He regained his panther tail and ears. His hair had also grown long, almost reaching the ground, almost like a second tail. Grimmjow crouched down low like a beast stalking its prey, his muscles taut. Unsure how much Grimmjow's resurrection would boost his power, Hisashi didn't hold back. Faded blue vein-like patterns were starting to spread across his body when he started using Blute Vene to massively increase the resistance of his skin in preparation of what was surely to come. He immediately used his illusory aura to cover up the changes before they became brighter and more obvious though. He had barely managed to complete the spread of Blute Vene, but Grimmjow had already disappeared from his spot, launching himself at Hisashi much faster than he had before. Hisashi was barely able to keep up with Grimmjow's new speed. Since he hadn't had a chance to adjust to the new speed, a loud screech and sparks occurred when Grimmjow's claws left deep gouges across his chest despite Blute Vene. Multiple trees around them were split like butter by Grimmjow's claws, sending them flying. Hisashi used the impact from Grimmjow's attack to launch himself away from Grimmjow and give him some breathing room. The gouges on his chest already healed, but this was the first time Grimmjow managed to injure him at all. Grimmjow didn't let up though and immediately dashed after him, spinning around and sending a kick his way that he barely managed to block with 2 of his blades. Hisashi wasn't quite sure why, but he felt some kind of desperation from Grimmjow's attacks that hadn't been there before. It made him wonder why. Since Grimmjow was currently much stronger than before, then shouldn't he be more confident than ever? Grimmjow used his resistance to propel his spin in the other direction, following up with a slash with his arm that, despite being blocked, sent Hisashi careening through the forest, smashing tree after tree before he finally managed to come to a stop. Grimmjow was close on his heels though. Grimmjow's claw stretching towards him in an attempt to stab him. "Take that!" Grimmjow yelled. Hisashi leaned back just in time to avoid the claw from piercing his head, but it still managed to cut off one of his arms, sending it flying with a burst of blood. He did a backflip and caught his detached arm, placing it against the bleeding stump. His healing factor immediately took over, reattaching the arm. He flexed it a bit to test it, making sure he could still use it. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Hisashi asked Grimmjow out of curiosity. He noticed Grimmjow hesitated as soon as he called him out. He was becoming more sure there was a reason Grimmjow seemed to be rushing the fight when his personality definitely made him the type to savor taking down his prey slowly, one bite at a time. The way he was acting was out of character. "Tch," Grimmjow spat out, but rather than refute Hisashi, he pushed himself even harder and threw a flurry of attacks at Hisashi that took all his effort to simply block the fatal attacks. He had to let the non-fatal attacks through though and simply rely on his regeneration to take care of the wounds they left. Hisaishi's breathing was growing more labored as he strained himself to keep up with Grimmjow's resurrection. The blue vein patterns on his skin were slowly starting to flicker as they struggled to handle all of Grimmjow's attacks. Hisashi charged another Sero, but allowed the blood from his wounds to drip down his blades and into the Sero. Given Grimmjow's lack of reaction, he hadn't learned about this technique yet. When the blood reached the gathering energy, it sped up the formation and increased the power many times over while dyeing it purple. This allowed Hisashi to immediately fire off a Gran Ray Sero that sent Grimmjow flying back miles through the forest, eventually leaving a deep trench in the ground when he hit it, ending his short-lived flight. For the first time in this battle, Grimmjow was hurt and it took him a few moments to recover. He slowly stood up from the trench, giving Hisashi a look that could kill. Unlike Hisashi, who had a stronger regenerative factor than even your regular Adjuchas, Grimmjow, like most Rainkar, had given up on his regeneration in favor of more power, which was showing some of its drawbacks now. Despite seeming to need it, Grimmjow didn't give himself more time to recover. Instead, he threw himself right back into the fight by dashing towards Hisashi at his highest speed. Grimmjow leapt on him like a cat, sending his clawed hands and feet at him in an attempt to cut him up, but Hisashi blocked each limb of his with one of his bladed arms each. Before Grimmjow was able to make a follow-up move, Hisashi used a front kick to send Grimmjow flying backwards. Hisaishi's blade started shimmering with blade energy that he sent flying Grimmjow's way in an inescapable crisscross pattern. It seemed Grimmjow's armor was tougher than he had expected, though. Unlike his expectations, he hadn't managed to dismember him and only caused some deep bleeding cuts to form. He was growing worried about whether he would be able to outlast Grimmjow. His recovery might be superior, but he didn't have unlimited energy and he very well might run out before Grimmjow. The only thing that brought him any relief was that Grimmjow didn't look any better. Covered in wounds and panting in exhaustion as well. He could only hope he would be able to occupy Grimmjow long enough for Nelliel 2 and the others to make it to Harel and the Trebuchets. Even if Grimmjow managed to win, he would be in no shape to fight Harel anymore. 64 Desperation. As the battle progressed, Grimmjow's already wild combat style only seemed to grow wilder and wilder. Though this made the battle more frantic, it actually became a little easier to keep up since it made him more predictable. His default action had become to attack after all. Even feints were becoming infrequent, which made Hisashi question what was making Grimmjow so determined to take him out as quickly as possible. Their clashes had flattened most of the surrounding forest they passed through, and though Grimmjow didn't seem to have learned his special claw attack yet, they were plenty dangerous already. The only part of him strong enough to resist them was his blades, as they sliced through anything else they came in contact with. Ha ha ha. Yes. More. Grimmjow laughed and yelled in excitement, his breathing growing haggard. Hisashi kept doing his best to block what he could and get some counter strikes in where he could, but he was still getting pushed back by Grimmjow's relentless onslaught. It was like Grimmjow couldn't even tell he was getting equally caught up in his fervor. Eventually Grimmjow took inspiration from Hisashi, cutting his palm and infusing his blood into his Sero to form his own Gran Ray Sero like Hisashi had. The forming Sero looked unstable, stretching and shifting. It appeared like it could blow up any moment, but either due to his ridiculous talent or plot armor, Grimmjow actually managed to form and maintain the Gran Ray Sero despite it being his first attempt and fired it successfully. Grimmjow smiled victoriously. Between switching to Gran Ray Sero and unleashing his resurrection, the power of his Sero was completely unlike before. Hisashi did his best to form one of his own to counter. When they came to a violent clash in the middle, Hisashi managed to hold on for a few moments, but eventually Grimmjow's Gran Ray Sero seemed to win out. It slowly started forcing back Hisaishi's closer and closer. When the two clashing Sero reached Hisashi, it slowly started disintegrating his blades and arms while continuing to try resisting the blast with what was left of his own and by pumping all leftover energy he could into Blute Vene. He did manage to slow down Grimmjow's Gran Ray Sero, but the crazy amounts of heat it was giving off at such a close range was evaporating his arms regardless. The Sero worked its way through his blades and arms until they were gone completely, but Hisashi had succeeded in countering most of the energy it contained. After negating his Sero and evaporating his 4 arms, it didn't have enough strength left to do the same to his torso. At the current rate, Hisashi had only managed to delay the inevitable. Grimmjow might have expanded most of his energy creating the attack, but Hisashi had done the same to block it and was now down 4 arms. They had already started to heal, but it would still take a while before that made any useful progress. ignoring the amount of pain that would continue distracting him until they had recovered. Itachi. He heard a young girl's voice yell desperately. Both him and Grimmjow immediately turned towards the yell with entirely different emotions. Hisashi was finally relieved. It seemed Nell too had indeed found the hideout and brought all of them to help him. Nelta's face was a mess with tears, snot and drool staining it. Itachi. Please help him. Nell too cried out in desperation. Panting heavily, Grimmjow's eyes darted between the newcomers and Hisashi, his rapidly healing arms in specific, nervously. As soon as Harel saw what was going on, she dashed ahead of the group, reaching beside Hisashi to support him. You look like you could use a hand, she said. Had it been anyone else, he would have taken that as a dig at his current state. She seemed calm on the surface, but Hisashi could tell the underlying worry in her tone. Grimmjow looked between the two of them hesitantly. He seemed rather frustrated to have the fight he had been searching for so long interrupted. Like someone put the most delicious plate of food in front of a starving man, and right as he is about to dig and taking it away again. He could sense he wouldn't be able to beat Hisashi if Harel joined the fight, though, from the levels of spirit pressure she was giving off. It was already a pretty even fight before she got there after all, and now he saw no way for him to succeed on his own. Let alone if the other 7 also decided to join in. I didn't know you were such a coward. Grimmjow tried to taunt Hisashi. Unfortunately for Grimmjow, Hisashi wasn't some kind of shonen protagonist. He cared about his own life, he also had friends he needed to protect and family to eventually return to. Dying was not something he would risk for a thrill of a battle, his pride, or something else insane like that. If someone was on or beyond his level, he would happily gang up on them instead if it meant he and those with him could survive another day. Hisashi could only shake his head at Grimmjow's naivety, pissing him off even more in the process. On some level, he seemed to sense that Hisashi had disdained him. Seeing his attempts weren't succeeding, Grimmjow crouched and disappeared into the distance. Hisashi could chase him, but the rest wouldn't be able to keep up, which would just put him into the same situation the two of them had been in before. All he could do is continue building his strength, so hopefully next time he would be able to stand up against Grimmjow all by himself. At least now that Grimmjow had already become an reincarnate, he shouldn't see any sudden jumps in power from him, unless something unexpected happened at least. Nell too ran up, launching herself into Hisashi like a cannonball. He would complain about the tears, drool and snot being wiped on him, but he didn't have the heart. 65 coming together. Itachi. I was so worried. Nell too cried. Hisashi wrapped his still healing arms around her the best he could while avoiding cutting her with his blades and rubbed the top of her head with his cheek. There. See, I'm doing just fine, he said, trying to comfort her. But. She stuttered, looking at his arms. He smiled lightly, showing her one of the arms to reveal it was still healing itself at a rapid pace, causing it to reform from nothing. It wouldn't take him much longer before he was fully healed. Finally seeing he was probably going to make it, she sighed in relief, the worst of her panic subsiding and some hope returning to her gaze. See. It'll be all better before you know it, he reassured her. She nodded and hugged him even tighter. When Hisashi looked up, he actually saw Harel looking at the two of them tenderly, which surprised him. She usually kept her expression very neutral, and reading any of her emotions required paying close attention to minor changes in her expression and tone to even get a slight clue. He looked down to Nell too, who was still making a mess of his chest. Thank you for saving me though, he told Nell too with a warm smile. After wiping away the various liquids from her face, she eagerly climbed up on his shoulder again and patted his shoulder. Of course, Itachi is a big brother too. I was so worried, she said. Wouldn't you rather spend time with a big sister? Apaxi tried to tempt Nell too. Unlike her expectation, Nell too simply crossed her arms and shook her head. I'm sure Hisashi would like to spend some time with this big sister, Sung-sun teased Apaxi. Screw him, she retorted. Language missy. Hisashi joked. Sung-sun chuckled. Mila Rose just shook her head at them. Surprisingly, Harel actually came up to them out of her own initiative. I know we didn't have a chance before, but are you doing okay? She asked Nell too worriedly. I'm okay now, Nell too said with a proud smile. Hisashi almost pouted. Who was the one being attacked just moments ago here? Harel raised her brow at him, and he could almost swear she smirked under her mask. And you? She asked him. I'm doing fine, thank you very much. Nice of you to ask, he retorted. She actually chuckled for a moment before schooling her expression. Hest and Dondakaka were rather nervous. Though they could handle Apache, Sung-sun and Mila Rose, Haribel and Hisashi were both well beyond them. Though they had grown to trust Hisashi somewhat over the time they spent traveling with him, they were still more cautious than Nell too, who had taken to him like water. Now that they were surrounded by so many others, their cowardly nature was in full force. "Nell-sama," they shouted in chorus, rushing to her. "It's fine. Big brother is here with us," she reassured them while looking at Hisashi with a confident smile. Hisashi couldn't help but smile back at her confidence in him. "We should head to the hideout just to be safe," Haribel insisted. Hisashi and Nell too agreed, and it didn't take long for everyone to get back to the hideout. When they got to the hideout, Hisashi decided to play some games with Nell too to help her calm down after everything that happened. They played some tag and eventually switched to board games like he had done with the Trebuchets a previous time. Nell too ended up playing a game against Apache. "I win," Nell too yelled proudly. "What? Impossible," Apache yelled, unwilling to accept her loss to a child. Nell too crossed her arms over her chest, looking down on Apache, frustrating her even further. "You can call me big sis," she said. "Get over here," Apache yelled angrily as she rushed towards Nell too. Nell too quickly hid behind Hisashi and immediately climbed up his back and onto his shoulder. "Apache couldn't even beat you. Nell too is truly amazing," Hisashi joked. Nell too actually stuck out her tongue at Apache and pulling down her lower eyelid to taunt her. Apache stomped her hoof in frustration, wanting to drag Nell too down from Hisashi's shoulder, but there was nothing she could do. Defeated by a little girl. "Poor Apache," Sung-sun said as if she was empathizing with Apache, but truly she was just egging her on more. "You have to be the bigger person, Apache." "You two stop making things worse though," Haribel scolded Apache, Sung-sun and Hisashi while defending Nell too. "Why yes, Haribel-sama," Apache said in a defeated tone. She could argue with Sung-sun and Hisashi, but not Haribel. Sung-sun nodded in agreement. Hisashi just shook his head in amusement though at Haribel's double standard for Nell too. "Let's play," Haribel told Nell too, who became excited again, jumping down from Hisashi's shoulder to join her. "Yes, big sister," she said, happily dragging her to the games they made, explaining the rules to Haribel, who listened attentively despite already knowing them. She was already there when they were explained to Nell too herself after all, but she didn't mind humoring the girl. Hisashi joined them two, playing together, sometimes helping Nell too to even the balance while sometimes helping Haribel or simply cheering from the sidelines when necessary. As the games continued, Nell too slowly forgot about the precarious situation they had just been through, distracted by the fun, games and new friends instead. The surprising part was seeing Haribel open up more than she ever had before. Not only to Nell too, but also towards Hisashi, who despite all the time and effort they had spent together had made less progress in getting closer to Haribel over the months he knew her than in one evening spent with both her and Nell too. It was a little depressing, but he was just happy that their relationship was improving like he already had with the rest of the Trebuchets. Even Apache, who constantly argued with him, was more like a rebellious little sister and had been closer with him despite the arguments than Haribel had been.